All right, so welcome. So this is our second iteration of ORMAP training, and I'm glad we got a great response from the first one, and I actually see that we have some people who are back again with this training. And I'm looking at Douglas County and saying, yeah, I'm interested in why you wanted to come back and do this training again. So why don't you unmute yourself for a minute? Why are you taking this again?
Yeah,
Well,
so this is
Viola.
so we have our second individual here, Brent Bennick. Their initial person was actually Jesse Wayman, which is our primary cartographer. So we want to get him up to speed. We're actually currently using Parcel Fabric and want to make sure to find some small pieces and details of maybe ways to optimize our process. And that's also why I'm here too, because that's the primary thing. I'm just looking at how we can optimize that process and things I might be missing, because we went through training, we have a lot of it instituted, I have a lot of best practices, but I don't have it fully. I need to come back and just at least optimize it a little bit. So that's it. And he didn't take the training before. I did though.
Great. And that's the perfect answer. Thank you. Yes, that's the perfect answer, because when you first get exposed to the Parcel Fabric, it's a little overwhelming. There's a lot of things that are associated with it, a lot of nuances in here. And, it's second exposure, you usually get to see a little bit more on here. I also see that Dean just logged in or signed in. Dean.
Yep, I'm here.
Why don't you say something and introduce a little bit about this training, just so that we can sort of set the stage?
So, okay. I haven't had my second cup of coffee, so I'll give it a
by
shot.
the way, I just put him on the spot.
So, so where we are with all of this is that, the goal of the Tools Committee has expanded out with the implementation of Pro and Fabric. Those of you that were here those new people that were here in 2003 to 5, when we came up with the ORMAP version, we spent a lot of time and did a bunch of classes on our own of showing folks how to get into doing things with ORMAP and with how to use it to maintain assessor maps. So this round, and the Tools Committee then wrote tools. So this round, we again recognize that it's going from ORMAP to Pro is a heavy lift. And like we did before, we're doing classes. And the really great thing that we have now that we didn't have then is that we have money. So we can hire Frank, and he's graciously allowed us to use his resources so that it's actually someone who's very up on Fabric. Whereas when we went to ORMAP, it was sort of us just making it up as we went. So I'm very excited about this. And I really encourage you to take the time to look at just all the things that are in Fabric. And the focus of this class is not Pro. It's not the ORMAP data structure, although we will be using the ORMAP data structure. Frank's going to be focusing on how to make Fabric go. We do have other resources, and we'll spend a little bit of time on the last day, which is next week, going over the tools. But really, this is to get you up to speed on the nuances of Fabric, and that's a lot to do. So my assumption is you've all at least given a shot at some of the things in Pro. Our goal with this is that you're going to be able to take the township data that we've got, that you'll download was part of the class, which came from Poke, and it's a version of the data standard, and you'll start playing, and then you'll start working with your GIS folks and other members of your GIS staff to figure out an implementation plan to make it all happen. And that's pretty much the goal. So in our processes, you should have some ARC Pro training, some experience. You'll get up to speed on Fabric. you'll be able to use Fabric using the map or ArcPro ORMAP data set and tools, and then start looking at implementation plans and how do you really pull this off. So that's sort of how it all fits. That's my 2-minute overview. Hope that works.
There you go. There you go. Perfect. Perfect. And just to clarify, I am not a cartographer. I am a surveyor. Right. And I am a surveyor who has been doing GIS since 1984. So I've been doing GIS a long time and a surveyor. I actually started doing GIS, getting involved in GIS within about 2 months of getting my surveying license. So I call myself a platypus. I'm a surveyor and a GISP. We own a GIS company, but it's also licensed as a surveying company. We don't have field crews. It's all GIS surveying is what we do. All right. So again, just to remind everybody, I'm going to try to be a little bit more careful this time than I was with our last set of training. I made some comments as a GIS professional that we led into some really nice discussions from our cartography standpoint. But I am not a cartographer, so hopefully I don't say anything that goes and offends anybody, but starts a spirited discussion. Because that's really what this is. You're going to find as we go through that even though I am a teacher, a trainer, I actually am a very strong advocate of the Socratic method. When you ask me a question, don't expect me immediately to give you an answer. Rather, I'm going to go and try to walk you through to explore so that you discover the answer, because I already know it, but I know what I had to do to get to that answer. I want you to make sure that as part of this, you're not afraid to explore a little bit. Please, that's it. That's the way we really learn. That's again, my belief is that we learn by making mistakes, not necessarily by somebody telling you what to do. So let's see if we could sort of start with this, whole exploration of the parcel fabric. And I'm looking at it, I still have ORMAP on here. I apologize. I know it's ORMAP. So our schedule here is you got me for 4 days, 4 hours every day. And today we're going to go from 8 a.m. to noon Pacific time. Tomorrow, the same thing. And then we move into next week on the 14th and the 15th. I apologize. We had to shift those days around. We originally were going to go on the 15th and 16th, but we had to make it a little earlier. I had a conflict on the 16th. So same thing though. And the training room invite, the Zoom invite, if you're here, you obviously got it right. Just know that this never changes. That literally is the Zoom invite into this room. And this will not change during the entire time on here. All right. All materials available here at this URL. And I'm going to go and show you actually what those materials look like. When you actually get in here, let me see here, ORMAP. It actually gets you to a training folder. And inside the training folder, you'll find a whole series of information. The two important things of information is here you'll see 2 PDFs. This first PDF is actually the slides that I am using. All right, the slides that I am using. So you can actually go and download this and follow this along if you want. There's also a version of this in which there's actually areas for you to take notes if you're one of those people that still likes to print things out and take notes on them. Be aware this is 52 pages, but just so before you send it to the printer, you'll recognize it is 52 pages long. on here. So those are the two PDFs that you want to go in and look at. And then the other information in here, you'll find some backup data. We've got some other backup information with zip files in here of certain things that Dean and I had looked through and given you. That's not as critical. There's a recording folder. In that recording folder, all of the recordings for every single day's training will be placed there. Matter of fact, we've also included the August training. So these are all the recordings from the previous training. So if you want to go through and really fall asleep, there's lots of recordings for you to go and do that on. But just know that everything that we're going over here is available. If, for example, you have to miss one of the sessions or you wanted to go back and review it on here, there are no transcripts, but all of the recordings will be available in that recordings folder. There's some other sample documents. Again, these are things that we talked about using for training, some of which we're going to use. Some of it depends upon how deep we get into it. And it's just things like, PDFs of certain documents and deeds that we were using for mapping, and we'll go over. And then there's the T7-4V2.03. This actually is the data. And there is, in fact, two versions. There's a Fabric one, which actually has an ORMAP PF.APRX. This is the Esri ArcGIS Pro project file. And then it also has, where is it here? The databases in here. Here it is, the databases that you're going to be using for it. So you've got all this information. One final folder is the video folder. This is a series of videos that Dean had recorded about the ORMAP tools. All right, so everything you need is there. So make sure that you don't lose that link. Again, let me go back here. And let's close that out. And let's go to here, sorry. Here. So don't lose that link. That link is to all the materials. The training sessions are recorded and available after the session is complete. Takes me about an hour to go and recompile if we were to do the entire time. So just give me an hour or so. Daily schedule. We tend to run this the same way every day. First couple hours are going to be sort of just a general review. That first review that you see there, I used to teach at college and I used to call this homework. All right. I'm going to ask every single day before we start that I'm going to ask you to do your homework. And what that is a general discussion of what we went over both the day before and previously, and tell me things that you remember from the discussion and things that you learned, things that you thought were interesting. And it doesn't have to be just from the previous session. It can be the entire time up to this point. But, and this is the part that people usually object to, I am going to ask that every one of you participate in this. I'm going to call on everyone to go and give me at least one item that you learned, that you're going to use, that you maybe even have questions about. And what you will find, and again, I've done this for 20 years now, as you go through this, you will find that, yes, in the first couple times, it's going to be a little challenging. It'll be like pulling teeth for some people to have to get involved in the discussion. But as you participate, you will find that it will spur greater discussion. And I firmly believe that it will help foster in all of you a deeper understanding of what this is. After that review, after that homework, we're then going to go into new materials and demonstrations. We'll take a 30-minute break and then come back and either do more, or we'll do some more answers and questions and answer sessions on here. Any questions yet on what we're going to do so far? The question usually comes up, by the way, is who am I? Who is Panda Consulting? Who is Frank? I've already told you that I am, in fact, a surveyor. I'm a professional land surveyor in 2 states. I'm down here in Florida. And so I am licensed in the state of Florida, and I'm licensed as a GIS surveyor in South Carolina. So I'm exposed to both the public land survey system here in Florida and the colonial or meets and bounds systems in South Carolina. So I get a little bit of both. I have, as I said, been involved in GIS for over 40 years. I was thinking recently it's getting closer to 50 years now that I've actually been doing some mapping. So I've been heavily involved in GIS and some of the GIS communities around here. I am also still involved in surveying. I recently finished up a 10-year appointment to the Florida Professional Surveyors and Mappers Board, which is the regulatory board. So I'm a platypus. I do a little bit of both on here. Panda Consulting is a small professional services firm. When I say small, I mean literally small. There's 5 of us, and that's the entire company. There's myself, my wife, who does all the finances, and then it's got my son and my brother, and then we've got a senior management, a senior project manager, and that's it. But we've been doing this now for almost 25 years, and we focus on land records. Almost exclusively land records on there, and how to map those, how to go and maintain information about them, how to organize the information about them. We are Esri business partners. We have been Esri business partners since we were founded in 1998, and we have been testing and involved with the group that does all of the parcel fabric development on here. A little history. Before I formed Panda Consulting, I actually worked for the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation. So I worked for a nonprofit for most of my formative years. I worked for them for 25 years, then went out and left and formed Panda Consulting. But I was involved with them, and mainly I was the director of their land information. They at one time owned over 200,000 acres of land in 20 different states. So I was responsible for managing all the information about them. Yes, they are the MacArthur Genius people. And it's an interesting, we get a side discussion going on. It's very interesting in what's involved in that project, and how do you actually decide who gets money and who doesn't get money. That's not what we're going to talk about today, though. What we're going to talk about is ArcGIS parcel fabric. All right, and so this is just a general outline of it. We're going to spend a lot of time talking about defining the parcel fabric and how it works. You may wind up learning more than you really want to know about the parcel fabric, how it works, but I want you to have that deep understanding of what it really is. It's not a black box. It actually makes sense once you understand what it is. We'll give you instructions on how it works, how you should be using it. We'll do things like explore the concept of records and what they are, and when you should use one, when you should not use one, creating a record, modifying records, defining what features are included in records, removing them from records, putting them into records, those sorts of things. Then we're going to look at processing a subdivision and making sure that it's part of a record. simple things like merging or combining things together and splitting tax lots by meets and bounds descriptions and splitting out tax lots by aliquot description and distributing overages and shortages. How do you make adjustments within the parcel fabric? And then removing gaps and overlaps, working with control points. And then finally, it's going to be map production, including some cartographic elements. And we're going to bring Dean back in for that so that he can go in and show some of the tools that are built into there. All right. I am going to request as much as possible that you participate and interrupt me. I can sit here and talk for 8 hours at a time. I actually gave a keynote presentation to the Chicago Title Insurance Company. It was an 8-hour keynote they asked me to do. And I can talk for 8 hours. My voice gets tired after a while, but I can talk for that long. But I'm going to ask that you interrupt me with questions. Please stop me and ask questions on something that you're thinking about, something you have a question on. Please do that. If you don't have a mic, and I know, Josh, you don't have a mic, go ahead and put it in the chat window. My chat window is up over on the side. We can go ahead and discuss things there. But things that you want me to talk about, things you want me to go in and expand on, let me know that. All right? Okay. Go ahead.
Absolutely. 100% sounds great. I'm happy to interrupt you at any time.
Good, perfect. So Viola was here last time, and I know he will interrupt me no matter what, and good insights. I need those insights because it feeds on making sure that I understand that you are actually getting what I'm saying. All right. So let's begin with this. The first question that we have is, when Dean and I started talking about this training, we were at a point where ArcGIS Pro 3.x was still in alpha testing. And we were trying to figure out what format should we have it in? What should we do with 2.x or 3.x, or how should we do it? Trying to anticipate when 3 was going to be released, what the differences are and such. So what are the differences between 2.x and 3.x for Pro? And the first difference is the fact that Esri has changed the way things are stored between 2.x and 3.x. And they've moved from a KML structure, or excuse me, from an XML structure into a JSON type of structure. It's more efficient, gives them more abilities in there, but that means that you can't change things back and forth. So that the APRX, the project file, the map file, style files, layout file, geodatabases, even to a certain extent, annotation, etc., they all have different structures when you're moving from 2 to 3. What that means is that if you open something in 3, it changes the internal structure. You open and save, it changes the internal structure of many of these files so that they're no longer backward compatible. And Esri does a great job of telling you that this is from a previous structure. Do you want to go and save it in the new structure? It will change it, but make sure you understand the implications on that. Because once you open it, save it in 3, you can no longer open it in 2. It's no longer compatible with that. And that's the biggest challenge that you have. So what that means is that if you are the only person in your office and the only person with access to these files, yeah, go ahead and move over to 3. It's got some new things in it. All the debugging is happening in 3. All the new functionality is happening in 3. But if, in fact, you have an office in which you've got some people are using 2, some people are using 3, just know that when you start opening and saving your files, you're going to change the structure so that those other people that are still working in 2 can't read them anymore. All right. There's actually a link here, and it says, so what's the main difference is? What do you have to do to get started? What do you have to be aware of? You want to be just aware of this, that it's no longer backward compatible. So once you move into 3, you can't go back anymore on there. All right. So I often get asked, so what's in 3 for me? Well, there's a couple of both interface changes. The fact that as they're going through, continues to make ArcGIS Pro more and more efficient. They continue to clean up code as you're going through here. Let me share with you, I recently, matter of fact, last night, I happened to have to call up an older version of Pro because I was transitioning from, I had a client that had an earlier version of the parcel fabric, and they wanted to go and get it upgraded. And the thing is, with the upgrade data set function that you need, it only upgrades one version. So I had to go all the way back to where they were and upgrade it into an interim version, then go and upgrade it again into the final version they wanted it on. And I had forgotten how much slower those earlier versions of ArcGIS Pro were than the current version that we're using. So just be aware that Esri is continuing to refine this. And as much as possible, if you can, you want to stay up on the latest version of ArcGIS Pro. From a functionality standpoint, as it relates to the parcel fabric, there's some labeling updates. There's been a lot of work done on labels inside of 3, and we'll demonstrate some of that for you and how some of that works. Right now.
Hey, Frank, I had a quick question. This just out of curiosity, it's actually the previous point. So performance-wise, do you see a lot of difference between like 3.0.3 versus 2.9.5 at all?
There is.
So curiosity again.
There is. And so, and I haven't gotten any metrics for it, but it's just intuitive. And sort of what I am in looking at it. So let's talk about this, that one of the differences between MAP and Pro is that Pro is attempting, and I won't call it intelligence, but they're attempting to pre-read all of your data. They're attempting to go and load it into memory and get it ready for you so that when you want to go and do something, it's there and available for you. All right. Whereas ArcMap, you would point to it and it wouldn't do anything until you actually told it to do something. So it always seemed very fast because you could interact, but there were a lot more steps involved to get to that point. With Pro, for example, when you go to do a query, it actually reads the attributes on there before you make a query. So it actually preloads that into your memory. And what I see is that when I'm working in 3, it tends to get ready faster than it did in 2 on there. So yes, there are, again, and I know some of the developers on Pro, and they are continually rewriting some of the code, and they're trying to make it more and more efficient as they're going through. So they're constantly looking for improvements in that efficiency.
Awesome. Thank you for the insight.
Thanks. All right. So here's the recommendation regarding 2.x or 3.x. If you're working in a heterogeneous environment where you've got 2 and 3, you got multiple people working on different versions, stay with 2. Yeah, it's a little bit slower, but you're not going to know major differences. If you're working by yourself, though, and everybody is on the same version, come to 3. 3.1 is about to be released. We've been testing it. I've been testing both the alpha versions and the beta versions. It's maybe even by the end of this month, it'll be out. they continue to refine this as they're going through. So, by the way, you will see me, and I'll make sure that I tell you when I make a transition and change from 2.x to 3. I actually will be able to go and pull it up and use it. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at the parcel fabric here, and I am using 2.9 ArcGIS Pro. So let's start with the parcel fabric. Let's last for some discussion here. Does anybody know what the parcel fabric is? Viola, you cannot answer. Does anybody have preconceived notions of what the parcel fabric is, or you want to share with me what Esri has been telling you the parcel fabric is?
I would like to say, Frank, it's a system for maintaining land-based records, cadastral records. That is just my novice definition of it, or understanding of it.
That's a good general discussion of it, but let me tell you, I have clients that don't necessarily maintain, well, it's land-based, and that they're talking about acquisitions and divestitures and stuff. I have universities that go and use parcel fabric to keep track of their holdings. It's not the traditional type of cadaster. It's a way for me to go and manage my land. Anybody else? I saw
Frank,
Brittany.
this is Robert out here in Oregon.
Yes, Robert.
My understanding is that parcel fabric is basically Esri's use for building a construction layer and keeping everything and being able to control the records and keeping everything in one area for keeping your records and that consistent. Is that correct?
That's it's getting closer. Yes, it's getting closer on here. That's actually a pretty good description. So let me take my shot at it. All right. So the parcel fabric is actually a way to go and ensure that the traditional types of lines and polygons complete a parcel in it, so that it's made for parcels. It's not made for lines, it's not made for points, it's made for parcels. And that parcel is defined as being a polygon area and lines associated with that polygon area and points associated with those lines. So it's all about mapping areas on here. And then there's attribution about those areas, but it's basically always about areas. And the concept is that, let me see if I can go and do this here with, let me start annotating here. The concept is that you have an object, a computer object, which is going to go and listen to you. It's going to listen as you're doing things. And if the features that you're working on are part of the parcel fabric, it goes and interacts with them. If those features you're working on are not part of the parcel fabric, it doesn't impact them at all. And in order to go and track what's going on, they have a concept called a record. Now, this record is a polygon feature class. That record goes and stores organizing information. So if you wish to find everything associated with a specific deed, you can find what was impacted by that deed? What lines did I use to create that deed? When did I map that deed? What's the area that's defined by that deed? Area or areas defined by that deed? How was that deed actually constructed? Those are the types of things that are part of this record. And that a record consists of the lines defining the boundary, the polygons being the area included in there, points on the ends of those lines, and possible connection lines. So what are connection lines? Connection lines are basically those lines which are involved in a meets and bounds description. A meets and bounds description is one that says, here's my starting point, go through this various courses, this bearing and distance, the bearing and distance to the beginning of the parcel, and then go around the boundary of the parcel. So the connection lines are those lines that go from the point of commencement to the point of beginning. Those are all connection lines, and they are defined as being critical to the placement of the parcel, but they are not defining the boundary of the parcel. They are more of ancillary information for where that parcel is located. You don't have connecting lines on things like an aliquot description where it's a portion of something else because you're already defining what that overall parent parcel is. But you have connection lines on meets and bounds descriptions. Okay, so you've got a record, which is sort of an organizing feature. That record goes and can be literally anything from a conveyance document to a subdivision to a document which might be a U.S. government township plat. And you could include in that record all the information defined by that document. And the records have lines, polygons, points, and connection lines. And if you have something as part of a record, the parcel fabric will listen to it. And then in that parcel fabric, you have rules that help sure that it complies with it. And the first set of rules you have is the topology rules. These are topology rules, but it's not your father's topology. This is a different type of topology that we're going to explore. And you have attribute rules. Attribute rules are a way for you to go and ensure that certain attribution is populated, that it's calculated and such. And then you have error features. They are the result of either rules that are not complied with, either topology rules or attribute rules. That is the parcel fabric. All right. And it is, let's look at it. All right. So let me go. This is ArcGIS Pro 2.9. And I have in here my database. And in here, I have a parcel fabric. Parcel fabric in the catalog pane of ArcGIS Pro always appears as a blue object, and that literally is the fabric itself. That is the controller object that watches everything. So if we right-click on this parcel fabric and look at properties, it will tell us that, in fact, where it's located, the name of it. But if I pull down and expose the parcel fabric component of it, I can see that it is, in fact, when it was created, what version it is. And the versions we'll talk about a little bit more. Version 5 is currently the most recent version of the parcel fabric. And the minimum compatible pro release is 2.9 for this version. Last modified here, it's got topology associated with it, the maximum number of parcels in a build. We'll talk about builds and validates and things like that on here. So here's the controller object. This gives you information about it. And if I look at parcel types, these are the actual feature classes that it's watching. These are the types that are included in here. There's tax lots, there's condos, subdivisions, and tax codes. These are the parcel types that the parcel fabric object is going to be listening to and watching on here. All right. So if we look at this, all those parcel types inside catalog, we see that every parcel type has a polygon feature class and a line feature class associated with it. Everyone has polygons and lines associated with it. All right, so lots has lots and polygons and lines. Map index has polygons and lines. Subdivisions, polygons and lines all the way through. There's also a series of relationship classes that are part of the parcel fabric. So that if we look at this relationship class here, it basically just says that the relationship class says that the condominiums are related to a record. All right, so it's a simple one-to-many. You've got one record that's associated with many condos in here. All right, and it's related by the global ID. We're going to explore this further. All right, one more thing here as we go down through the parcel fabric. You've got some additional ancillary features inside this object. You've got adjustment lines, adjustment points, adjustment vectors. These have to do with least squares adjustments. If you never use them, you never use them. But just be aware that they are there for least squares adjustments. And we'll explore a little bit more if you're interested in that. This is your connection line feature class. Again, these are the lines that serve from the point of origin to the point of beginning on a meets and bounds description. There are points. Parcel fabric has points for every line. And here's your record feature class. This is a polygon feature class. And then finally, we have topology. If we explore topology on here, we have the following feature classes in here. We have subdivisions, lot lines, tax lot points, connections, adjustment lines, points, tax lots, tax lot lines, tax code lines in here, and you can see which ones are actually participating and which ones are not. I'll keep talking until somebody stops me. All right, rules. So if we look at tax lots here, there are 6 topology rules associated with every parcel type. The first rule says that lines associated with this parcel type have to have endpoints on them. There has to be points at the ends of the lines. You have to have points on them. The second one is that the lines themselves can't have dangles. They have to be connected up. So undershoots and overshoots, they are not valid. They break the topology rules. Must not self-intersect. They can't loop back on themselves and intersect on themselves again. The lines must not self-intersect. So they can't go and cross over themselves. And finally, from the line standpoint, the lines have to be covered on a boundary of an area, a polygon. Those are the 4 line topology rules. And then finally, there's a polygon topology rule that says that the
It's actually
boundary
5, not 4.
sorry. So that, yes, the first one concerns the points themselves. So yes, the lines have to have points on the ends. The lines can't have dangles, can't self-overlap, must not self-overlap, must not self-intersect, and they must be covered by the boundary of the area. So you're right, there are 5 associated with the lines. I keep thinking about that, the endpoints as being a point feature class, but it's not, it's associated with the lines. And then the polygon rule is that the polygon boundaries have to be covered by lines. All right, those are the rules. So when I say this isn't your father's type of topology, the things that are missing here is that it doesn't have anything to do with gaps or overlaps or interrelationships between layers or anything like that. These rules are really structural rules. They just define that a parcel has to have all of these things associated with it, but it doesn't talk about how they relate to one another. You know, it doesn't talk about what has to be connected to something else. It doesn't talk about any of that. This is a structural rules as far as the topology on here. All right. So I'm going to demonstrate real quickly what the parcel fabric is doing. So the first thing we want to talk about is the fact that we have, with a parcel fabric, we have this thing called a heads-up display. It's this little gear and a little display up in the upper left corner of your drawing area. It can be moved around, but this is where it's displayed by default. And if I click on the menu portion of it, I can say, I want to go and start tracking what I'm doing, and I want to create a record. That will bring up a pane, and this record has set information on it. And this is part of your definition of what is a record. And there are certain things, for example, it has to have a name. It doesn't have to be a unique name, you know, because this is just a secondary attribution of it. It has to have a name, and by default, Esri thinks it has to have a recording date or has some sort of date structure. The reality is that's actually also not, it's optional. It's not required. These are just secondary attribution about it, because the reality is all it is a polygon feature that has a global ID that's not exposed right now, but it's got a global ID. So I'm going to say this is just, the name of this is, I'm going to date stamp it. There it is. There's my record. And when I have an active record, when I have said, I'm going to go and work with this record, what this means is that everything that I do for any of those feature classes that are part of this parcel fabric, it will begin embedding in them information about this record. So if I go in here now and create a tax line, all right, and let's go ahead and use a 2-point line. When I go in
I
here,
have a question.
yes.
So if you populate a partition plat in the record number, can you automate that or transfer that to the partition plat polygon? You don't have to enter it twice.
One more time. I want to make sure I understand it.
I saw in the record, there's a field for plat number.
Yep.
And you have plat number in your partition plat polygon layer. I don't want to enter it twice. Is there a way to automate it so that populates that field in partition plat?
There is in fact a way to do that. And I actually have a demo and I have a video up on YouTube about what we've done with certain record-based parcel fabric, so that as you make changes in the attribution, it automatically goes and takes those changes and pushes them down to everything that's related to that record. By default, that's not the way it works. By default, that information is static in the record, but you can set up your parcel fabric so that it goes and moves information back and forth. As a matter of fact, if you want today, I'll give you a little demo of that. That it can be set up to work that way using attribute rules on there. So good question. Thank you. Thank you. So let's go and start by creating just a single line record here, a single line in here. And if I look at the attributes of this line, all right, here's the line that I just created, and it doesn't have COGO information on here. But what it does have is this attribute field called created by record. It populates the created by record for everything that was created while you have an active record. And this value that it's storing in here is actually the global ID of that record polygon that it's creating right now. So it already has created the record. It hasn't finished the geometry yet, but it's creating a record and it's taking that global ID and populating it for every feature that you create that's associated with it. All right. So I've created a series of lines, and each of those lines have that same value on there, so that I can now go through and say, select the features from my current record. So everything that I created that's associated or related by this record will now show up here. And really all that did is it said, okay, let's select out of all these other feature classes, everything that has created by record associated with it. That's all. It's just doing a select against that on here. But it's important to recognize that when you're dealing with the parcel fabric, it's really focusing on things that have values stored in that created by record. Notice right underneath it is retired by record. So the parcel fabric tracks things that you create and things that you delete. And it's not a real delete. It's deletion basically says it's no longer current. So mark it as retired by or historic on here. All right. So I've created 4 lines. I've got an active record on here. Within the parcel fabric, there is a function that says, evaluate my lines that are part of this record and see if they form a closed polygon. If it forms a closed polygon, create the beginning of a polygon, create a seed on here. So it will go through and create a seed. And if I actually go and select that seed, unselect this, that's actually the beginning of my new tax lot that I'm building in here. And note, it really is a tiny, tiny polygon, but it doesn't really have any shape on here, but it's a polygon, and it really serves to go and visually show us you have closed lines on this polygon, or closed lines as part of this, and it will create a seed there. All right. So to demonstrate more, if I go in here and say, well, if that's the case, let me go and draw lines here. I still have an active record, so I'll create those lines. So I now have crossed lines. And if I say create seed, demonstrate, here are the lines that are associated with my record. Those are my lines. And if I see create seed, creates a seed anytime they form a closed polygon. All right.
So I noticed that you highlighted the tax lot lines, and then you did create seeds. You don't need to highlight those. Is it anything that's in that record that
That's
works by create seeds and not by the highlight, correct?
That's exactly right. And I only highlighted those so that to illustrate the fact that
Okay.
yes.
And that's
let's-
what I was finding, and that correlates with what I've been finding, is it just works
Yeah.
by whatever's in the active record.
because
Sounds
what
good.
it's doing is the create seeds is going through and selecting out of those feature classes everything that has that same global ID in the created by record. It's doing a really quick selection, analyzing only those selected lines, and then moving forward. All right, and to sort of build on that, let me go and turn my record off. All right, let me go and close my record out so it's no longer tracking. It's only going to go and track while that record is active. Now, when I go in here and create lines, again, let's go in here and create lines. All right, let's create all those lines. And if I tell it, oh, let's activate that record again, and I say create seeds, it's not going to build any more of those because none of those lines are part of the record. They are not part of the record. So I can, well, by the way, this is often a common mistake that people do while they're building it. They forget to have the record turned on. They forget to activate it. So they're building all these things. And the question usually is, well, how do I make them part of my record? So what we're going to do is we're going to select those lines now. And let me do it this way. Select those lines. And I'm going to go up to my menu and say, assign these selections to my record. Now, when I say create seeds, it should create a seed here and here and here and here, because it's all part of my record now. So again, this record concept is the organizing element in here. And what the parcel fabric does is listens to see if you have an active record. So it then uses the global ID of that active record and either marks them as being created by, or if you delete something, it marks it as being deleted or retired by that global ID. And that global ID will then be used when you're doing analysis, such as show me all the lines and whether or not they form closed polygons. And if it does, then create a temporary polygon or a seed for those. And once I've done with this, once I'm done building this, I can tell it to go and build. And build actually means evaluate the topology rules. And if I have polygons that are marked as seeds, expand them until they meet the lines and fully form those, and evaluate the lines and put points on the ends of them. And anyone that self-overlap or have dangles or anything, mark them as topology errors on here. So if I go build now, I can tell it to build my record, and it will go and build them all, and now created all those polygons for me. So if I go back here now and I say select all the features that are in my current active record, and I go here, I can see I have 12 points, I have 10 lines, I have 6 polygons on here as part of my record. If I were to go and check my topology rules, validate my topology rules, I would have dangles on here. I would have many other things in here. But just be aware that this is the parcel fabric. That literally is everything that it does. All the topology excuse me, all the parcel fabric does is track what you add, track what you delete, and evaluates the topology rules for you. Everything else is standard ArcGIS Pro.
And where would you check the topology rules?
You have to then go to Edit and your Topology Error Inspector. This is in 2.9. Topology Inspector. Let's pull this down and say validate the topology rules. And here's my dangles. Here's must be covered by boundaries. Okay. I'm going to be quiet here for a minute.
So is topology the same in parcel fabric as it would be outside of parcel fabric?
It is the exact same topology, correct? It is the exact same topology. Yeah. Okay, good question. But remember, it has a limited set of topology rules on it. It only has these structural rules as far as the topology. The normal question is, well, can I add topology rules for gaps and overlaps? Yes, you can, but you want to be careful about that because they may not really be required for you. So let's talk about topology because you want to be aware that the parcel fabric wants to make sure that everything that you create is actually getting tracked and has a created by record value stored in it. By the way, let's look here and say, okay, must not have dangles. All right, so let's select those, go to our fix here and say, here's our fixes. Let's try trimming them all out. And I don't even know what this distance is. Let's say 50 feet and trim, none of them. Let's say extending them. Again, I have no idea what this distance is right here. It failed to snap. What is this distance? Oh, no wonder. 207 feet. So let's trim these up by 300 feet. Oh, here, no, none of them still. So I could extend, I can trim them, but these are the fixes in here. Okay, it fixed some of these in here. So I still have, must not have dangles in here. On here, let's go and see which one of these. This one over here must not have dangles. In here. So be aware that as we're doing this, let me go and clear this selection out. As we're doing this, the standard topology fixes not only are, and this is in air quotes, correcting the topology errors, but it is invalidating additional topology errors as it's going. It's breaking them. And because it doesn't, and here, endpoints must be covered. This one doesn't have an endpoint on it. If I use my topology fix here and say, fix this one and create a feature here, that feature that it created is not getting marked with the record information. So the challenge is that as part of these fixes, you want to be aware that if you're relying upon old school topology fixes for this, this is not a good idea to go and attempt to fix it inside the error inspector, because it's going to build some, it's going to go and delete some, it's going to attempt to create some. Here, a line must be covered by a boundary, create a feature. or this remove the feature, but as it attempts to create things, it doesn't add the required information for the record. So overall, don't check topology with the parcel fabric, other than to identify where you've got an error and then go back and use and correct those with parcel fabric types tools. Let me go back here again and go and build this again. It builds that point in. That point now is marked with the correct record information. But again, you wind up with things like, okay, that's not valid anymore. So topology, you want to just be very careful if you're relying upon topology for this. That's not a great idea to go and do that within the parcel fabric. Other questions? Nothing? So comments, let's start with that. Comments. What insights do we have with this then?
I do have a question.
Yes.
So when you drew the lines and then built the parcels, did it break the lines where they intersect?
No. That's not necessarily part of a topology requirements on here. It's not required to go and break the lines on here anymore. So that what traditionally we would call the backlot issue, you know, where in fact you've got a subdivision with, sorry, let me go back here. You've got a subdivision with a series of lots here, and you got another series of lots here. It's not required that this line be split with this and this. You can have one full line here, one full line here, one full line here, one full line there, and one full line there. You can have those. You don't have to break lines anymore on there. It should be more reflective of what the actual document says it is on here.
So multiple lines, is that what you're saying, Frank?
Let's get into this. You really want to, if we could, let's dig deep on here. I want to really talk about this. Okay. So the parcel fabric allows you, let's go in and discard these changes. Yeah. Start fresh. The parcel fabric has two different ways that you can use lines on here. All right. It has what's called the unique or overlapping lines on here. So if I create a record, okay, let's create a record here. Create a record. Let's go and build lines. Create a seed. Let's create a parcel. All right, let's go and create another record. Again, oh, sorry. This second record is representing a new document on here, different record. Different record. Okay, let's create it. Now this record, in different record, is going to create a seed, create the parcel. So the record that I have here, I actually have two records. Each one is reflective of a deed of conveyance. So each one has its own set of unique lines on here. And if I go in here and I select, I will find that I have two lines. I have one line, which is associated with one record, and then I have another separate line, which is reflective of the adjoining record. Okay. This is the way the old ArcMap parcel fabric used to work. And so, but often it's not the way cartography works. But again, reflective of a record. That record defined a parcel. You wanted to know how was that parcel built? It was built by lines. But the parcel fabric also has an ability to go and all right, simultaneously, I'm creating another record now. Now this time, let's just pretend that this is a subdivision. All right, all of those lines are part of this record here. So when I go into create seeds, it will create those 3 seeds. It will go and build all those 3 seeds. And now when I go in here and look between the two, I have one line. So when you ask me, well, does that mean overlapping lines? Yeah, it does sometimes. It depends upon how those records relate to one another. So here's where, and the way I tend to introduce this is a concept in surveying called simultaneous conveyances versus sequential conveyances. All right. If in fact our records are reflecting a group of parcels that were created off of one record, subdivisions and lots inside of a subdivisions, if they were created off of a single record, they will have shared lines because the lines will relate to the record. They will not relate to the individual parcels created inside of it. They will relate to the record. If, however, we have what in surveying terms we call sequential conveyances, that's when in fact one occurs and then you've got another one occurring and then another one occurring. They are not at the same time. Those sequential conveyances will have different records and they will each have their own set of lines associated with the records. Okay, so that the parcel fabric allows both. As it relates to parcels, you can have parcels that have shared lines, or you can have parcels that have overlapping lines. It's not dependent upon the parcels anymore. It's dependent upon the record. And this is
Okay,
a big leap. Yeah, go ahead.
I understand that, and I get that, and that's beautiful and everything because you can keep everything built together. You don't have to split it out and seg out. Here's your new partition plat. Here's your new subdivision coming off of this one and that one. You can show your entire record of history through that area. But if you have a subdivision, which we all know we do, that has one line that comes through, a long line, say 1,000+ feet long, and off the north side and the south side, they do not run consistently on the lots. So your lots coming off are separate lengths. Would you still have double lines, or would you have individual line segments on that line?
Remember I said I love the Socratic method? Let's explore this. Okay, let's go and create a new record. And we'll call this test sub. All right, it's a subdivision. Again, we see that the active record here is test sub. So I'm going to go in there. I'm going to create subdivision lines. And I'm going to create this subdivision line, and this is going to be the subdivision. Let's go in here and snap here, okay? All right, let's make sure. And sorry, I'm trying to figure out, I'm not sure why this isn't showing up. All right. By the way, there's a whole series of settings in here that you got to be aware of. Why didn't those lines appear?
Is there a definition query in the?
There are definition queries against this, but and we're going to get into that. Retired by null. I thought I just created. Let's create them again just in case. Oh, okay. So let's try this. All right, there is my subdivision boundary, okay? And my subdivision boundary is that. Let's create my subdivision polygon. And then let's go and build this subdivision polygon. This is a subdivision in here. And if I look at it, it's a subdivision that's built in here. All right, it is the subdivision that's on here. So now I wish to go and build the lots inside of here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a function called copy lines to, because I want to take these lines associated with this parcel. Remember, a parcel is defined as an area with lines associated with it and actually points associated with it. I'm going to take this selected parcel, which is a subdivision, and I'm going to copy it to my lots layer. And my lots, okay, so I'm going to do a copy lines to, and I'm going to copy it to my lots layer. It's going to go and turn off everything except for what I was just editing. All right, and now I'm going to turn off my sublines, and I'm going to wind up having here 4 lot lines and one seed for here. So these lot lines are on a separate layer. I can go in here and I could select this line and I can say, let's divide these up into 4 equal parts. Let's make this easy. The 4 parts here. Good. And let's get off the divide. I must be zoomed out there quite a bit. Sorry, let me go in here. Scale dependency. All right, there we go. So now let's go here. Let's go and create some additional lot lines. Here to here. Here to here. Here to here. Okay. Now let's create the seeds for the lots. I have 4 seeds. Does it matter that that seed is close to the line? No, it doesn't matter on here. All right, so I have 4 seeds. C just has to be inside that polygon. Let's go and build my lots. Now I have 4 lots. Build this. Let's put our subdivision back on. So now let's ask our question again. And by the way, again, I'd rather not just answer it. I want you to see how it works. So on here, if I go and select this here, I have the lines associated with that one lot goes from here to here. The line associated with the subdivision goes from here to here. So I want to think about multiple layers when I'm talking about this model. This is not just one layer. This is multiple layers on here. So to answer your question, on the subdivision plat, the subdivision polygon was defined as having that 1,000-foot long line. But the lots are defined as having those smaller 250-foot long lines on here. So you can have the lines that are reflective of the document itself stored inside of here. All right. And it still works. It reflects whatever is shown on that quote record. Forgive me for that long explanation, but I wanted to make sure that you understand that's how this works.
Question, Frank.
Yes.
So if one of those lots was split horizontally, then that line would break. There'd just be one line, not 2 lines. I mean, there would be 2 separate lines, not doubled up.
Here's the trick. It may break. It might break. It depends upon you. How do you want to go and show that? It could be reflective of the actual document. If the document says it breaks, it breaks. If the document doesn't say it breaks, it doesn't break. You don't have to go and change the data to make it fit into the GIS. You reflect what really is shown on the document itself on here.
So, Frank, I have a question. Jeff Groth
Yes.
in Washington County. We've been having an issue with doing our outer traverse and co-going the whole outer traverse with curves. And after we do the outer traverse, then splitting out the lots. This probably could solve that, where our curves were breaking and we weren't able to get closures.
So Jeff, and forgive me if I just often don't remember. Were you the one that put it up on GeoNet?
No, I was not.
Okay, yeah. So there's a thread right now on Esri Community, and I'll explain sort of what it is so we can sort of understand it. Let's go and create another record here, just a test record, just so we can show you how this works. So if we go and create a line and let's do this in lot lines, tax lot lines. And we use a long curve. All right. And then let's build the rest of these. All right. And we go and if we create seeds, we'll find that we have 1 seed on here. That's good. Let's create that. Let's delete that seed again, because I want to go and show you. So we have 1 line. Everything closes in here, correct, right? If we take this line and we divide it into, let's make it 10 equal parts. All right. If we take that line and divide it, let's get off of divide now. let's see what happens now if we go to create seeds. Oh, shit. So it depends upon how it is. So often what will happen is when we have something long and we go and divide it up. Let me reset this line, sorry. And this is a good learning on here. On ArcGIS Pro, there is scale-dependent symbology. If you haven't worked with it yet, it kind of freaks you out the first time you do it. Scale-dependent symbology says that as your scale changes, you can change the symbology that's reflective of it. And if I go to my symbology of my tax lines, and I'll see here that here's the classes if I have multiple classes, and here's my scales. And this scale here tells me at what scale does this symbology change. So that in this case, it's 1 to 2000. So as I zoom out, you'll see the symbology changes. And as it relates to the parcel fabric, we want to see where these vertices are, where the endpoints are on these, so that often the best, you want to make sure that your symbology on your line feature classes are set so that the scale doesn't change until you zoom out to something like 1 to 24,000. And you can at least see it while you don't have to be super zoomed in there. Anyway, that was a side point. You want to make sure you set that. So inside of ArcGIS, all of Esri's products, this happens, but it's only because of Pro and some of the precision that it's trying to do that you're really beginning to see it. So inside of here, as we zoom in on this, and as we get into sort of this microscopic sub-zero levels, often what will happen is that these endpoints on something that's been divided will not snap to the same internal grid. All right, so if I go in here and I look at my properties of my data set, I have, in fact, what's called a resolution, this XY resolution. That means that it is actually snapping to the closest 0.0003 inside of here. And to go and sort of illustrate and see if I could do this a little bit better. So I've got a point, I got a point, I got a point, I got a point. I've got a grid that's in this case 0.0003 apart. And when I draw a line, on here, you know, my line might be going from here to here. When I split that line, when I go to cut it and split it up, if I split it here, for example, what might happen is that because it's got to snap to the closest grid, one line will go from here to here, and one line will go from here to here. And again, it's really, 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 really small, 0.0003. And normally it wouldn't impact you other than those instances where you're looking for these things to snap together. Esri knows it's a problem, but it has been a problem literally since ArcInfo. That's the way Esri goes and displays things on here. They are not displayed relative. They are displayed to this actual resolution grid. And people are beginning to understand that's what's happening when you do a divide on here. Okay. So I didn't illustrate it here, but often if you go and create a long curve and then you divide it, that divide tool does not have the ability to snap it to one another. like some of the other tools do. For example, there is a tool called a planarize tool. That's extension, planarize tool. The planarize tool actually has the ability to snap things together using a cluster tolerance. So if those points are within that grid, that cluster tolerance that you set, it snaps them together and makes sure that they are snapped together. But other tools such as the divide tool, that doesn't have it. So you wind up with certain tools not necessarily enforcing that the endpoints of those lines are actually snapped together. Am I describing the problem you're having, Jeff?
Yes, you are.
Yeah, yeah. Esri's aware of it. Matter of fact, there's a thread going on right now in the communities about it. I suggested that what Esri needed to do was to take this cluster tolerance option and apply it to things like the divide tool and some other tools to put it on there. The other thing you could do is you could go and select your lines and apply a planarize and let it snap to the cluster tolerance to snap them together. There is no easy solution right now, other than recognize that that is going to happen. The good thing or the bad thing, depending upon how you do it, is that with the parcel fabric, when you go to create seeds, it will tell you whether or not you have unsnapped or things that aren't snapped together.
Right. And that's how we found this.
It won't show you which ones, so you would literally have to go to every single connection to see. But yeah, it's a problem. No doubt about it, it's a problem. But like I said, at least it allows you to check for it beforehand. But there is no simple solution. Say, oh, always do this. No, you just have to make sure. I can tell you from a workflow standpoint, we've had to go and modify sort of the way we build parcels and subdivisions. And we now are doing something that, as a surveyor, I don't like doing. But what we will do is we will go and use the traverse tool to go and lay out the individual segments of a curve, for example, a line or a road right away, and then make sure that it gets adjusted to snap and close into an endpoint. So you wind up with an open traverse for those ones, rather than going and building it one time and then dividing it. Sometimes it's easier doing it that way. Other times, you there's, again, it's just issues.
Yeah, where we've really found it is a bunch of lots along a curve where our tendency is to do the outer traverse first,
Yep.
make sure it closes, and then build the lots next using divide, and then build the lots. But
And by the way, that's the proper way of doing it.
Right. And now we've started actually taking those curves and doing each segment individually rather than doing the outer traverse. But if we could do the outer traverse, break it, and then use the planarize on it and see if that works, that's a possibility.
That's one of the options. Also, let's look and see here. There's a tool called Snap. Which you can go and use on here. Come on, where is the Snap tool? The Snap is a geoprocessing tool. And the Snap tool goes and moves things together, and it will work against your selected features or all features. I would definitely go and say just use your selected features, and tells you what it is, and then what the distance is and what features you want to have snapped. You might consider using that also to have it snapped together, because again, the quote, correct way to go and build this is go and build the entire thing and then divide it up so that any rounding errors are sort of propagated throughout the entirety, not built onto one another. Because everything inside of a subdivision has a rounding error in it. It's all rounded down or rounded up. So I would consider also that using the snap tool on here.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah. Good discussions. Thank you. Anything else?
Hi, so just want to ask a quick question, just logic wise. So I know that you put together a subdivision, you're utilizing the subdivision, the lines to put that together, then you copied the subdivision lines to the lots, then you subdivided them out there into the 4 different lots there. Would like knowing that theoretically those would actually be equivalent being tax lots or parcels, we would just simply take those lines and copy those parcels to the tax lot lines and incorporate them into our tax lot lines? Would that be the proper procedure there? Or is that something we'll get to later?
That's a good question. It's a good question. So I've got my lots here. I'm going to do a couple things. I'm going to say, activate the record of my current selected feature. One of the things it says, okay, whatever I have selected right now, activate the record so I know what that is. And that's that test sub. All right. And now once I have that test sub, let's go and just take my lots here, only select my 4 lots. And let's say that these were tax parcels. There is a tool, a function, and let's go into it this way under these, just modify. Yeah. We're going to, under modify, there is a tool called duplicate parcels. And there's a couple tools to do this. If I do duplicate parcels, it will go and duplicate them to a chosen parcel type. All right, I can do this. I can also do a copy lines too. It depends upon whether or not I'm going to change this. If this is the exact configuration of these lots, I'll just do a duplicate and I'll duplicate them onto my tax lots. What it will do, let's go and show you. Okay, now I went and duplicated them. So now if I go and say, show me everything inside my record, I have not just points, but I have 4 tax lots, and it copied the lines associated with it over there. Because remember, a parcel is the polygon and the lines and the points that are unique to that record. Okay, so if it's the same geometry, duplicate parcels. If it's a different geometry, or I need to do something to that geometry to reflect, maybe there's 5 foot over, maybe there's they had some land swaps in here, I would use a different tool called copy lines 2, which took those polygons and the lines associated with them and copy them up to it and let me edit the lines that were in there.
So if we had that job there and we drew the northern line in incorrectly and we went in and changed that line, do all the features change that are in that part of that job? I mean, if you edit one line.
So,
Or, yeah, like say we're remapping that area. Those are already drawn and
so let's talk about this. So very good. Thank you. That's a really good concept, because inside the parcel fabric, we have a concept called, we're going to have record-driven workflows, or we're going to have quality-driven workflows. A record-driven workflow has a workflow which goes and creates things and deletes things associated with a record. A quality-driven workflow says we're remapping things, we're fixing things. It's not associated with a specific record. It's just for fixing these things, okay? So if in fact we had to go in and change something, I could go in here and select that point. Where it is, the point, all right? I could select that point. And because we have topology on here, when I move that point, let's go to modify move. When I move that point, everything that is associated with that thing gets impacted and topology gets impacted. So if I go in here and move this, all right, everything that's topologically corrected or topologically connected to that point changes. Now that topology that's in here, it's really not this topology that's doing it, it's the map topology that's doing that. But it's topology. It's evaluating what's connected to what. So if I go in here, let's do this, and I know this because of the symbology on my screen, it's really tough to see this, but let me take this line and move this line. And as I'm moving it, you can see some rubber banding occur to the closest node. So it connects to that one and that one. And let's move that onto across this line. And as soon as I cross that line, it breaks topology and won't let me go and change it. So to answer your question, yes, if I move a point, it's not reflective of a record. It's rather more quality driven or fixing up my mapping on here, that it's going to be moving those things, but it's only going to be moving things that are reflective of the map topology. Is that kind of what you were getting at?
Yeah, so I mean, instead of moving a point, if I just wanted to redraw the boundary line, like the southern boundary, if there's a different bearing, and
So,
so if I, like split it, or I mean, if I was doing an ArcMap, I just split the polygon, and I mean, I don't want to go in and redraw my subdivision, my tax lots, my lots. I mean, that's redundant work. I mean, if we can change one feature and have it.
okay, I don't want to confuse you in here. So let's do this. Let's go in here. We can see this here. All right, this is my tax lots on here. So if you wanted to go and change the configuration between these lots, you can do that. All right. And if you want the parcel fabric to track that, you could do that. If I have an active record, it can do that. So if in fact this line were supposed to be moved, I could move it. All right. And make that adjustment. Or if it was supposed to be redrawn, I could redraw it a different way to go and do that. Yeah. So it's what you used to do in ArcMap, but it's on steroids. It does a lot more than that.
Okay.
It's keeping track of what goes with what, keeping track of what is associated with what on there. Again, I don't want to introduce too much confusion, but it's exactly the same thing. Let me go and show you one more thing in here. Let's
Hey,
say
Frank?
yes.
I got a question real quick before we
Okay.
get too far. When you moved the subdivision from the subdivision over into the tax lots, you also made an extra set of polygons.
Yeah.
So are we actually going to be keeping extra polygons? Because normally what we do is just keep one set of polygons for the tax lots. Because now it looks like when we created them in the subdivision, but we're also going to be keeping them up in with tax lots. So we have them in two different spots.
That's
On
an
the track.
individual organization's decision. What you
Okay.
decide to do. Dean's going to talk about this here. Go ahead, Dean.
Yeah, so the design right now is at a minimum design, and we surveyed around it and found that and at the time we did the design way back in the first round of Parcel Fabric, we ran into a number of performance issues when we had many parcel types participate in the same Parcel Fabric. So we decided to go with a minimum number for two reasons. One, we are having performance issues, but more importantly, what we found is that once you left the tax lot, what individual counties were doing with lots and what they were doing with subdivisions was pretty variable. So our design is always the most common denominator to everyone. And what we found was that a simple parcel type of the tax lots would get everybody to be able to make the goal to tax lot data. Done. Also was very simple and everybody could then buy in and get into using that. So if you want to, for example, have subdivisions, if you want to have lots, if you want to have right-of-ways, those are all design issues that you can stack on with additional parcel types and do all sorts of cool stuff. You just have to know what the implications of that are, which we keep running into in this conversation. And those are great questions. And those are design things that you really need to consider. And that's why we're kind of recommending everybody get into the sample data set messing around before you really start to develop the full design for your organization. Because, you know, as you all know, getting you all to agree on exactly what the best cartographic structure or methodology is going to be, it's not going to happen. So those are all design things that you can decide with your GIS staff, looking at your business flow, because you all do it different. So we just went with, and in fact, one of the things that will be happening based on 3.1, for those that care, is we are going to add a new parcel type with condo. Esri's got some new things in 3.1 that's going to help with that. And we've really been sort of kicking around the idea of, do we want to do a parcel types of subdivisions? And boundaries? Do we want to do it with lots, blocks? And also, those of you that have sat in on some of the design meetings, do we want tax code to be an administrative boundary? Yet another parcel type, which Frank will talk about it as the day goes on. But those are all things you can decide. And those are not in this demonstration. But this is a great discussion. I'm glad you're having it. And those of you who are, take notes so you can, when you get into the design discussions, those are all the things you need to think about. So with that, I'll turn it back to Frank. Thanks, Frank.
Dean, thank you. Thank you. So that's a great point here, because what we're talking about is the differences between cartography and land records. All right. The model that you're seeing right here is really a land records model. It has very little to do with what your map is going to go and reflect. And even what Dean was mentioning about the condo types, and it's not just condos, it's 3D condos. It's using a strata component of which you're dealing with, well, this is this floor, and this is this floor, and this is this floor. And how do you model it? Not necessarily how do you map it, but how do you model it? How do you actually go and show it? Because again, the parcel fabric is really set up to do modeling of land records. Information that is getting tracked about this is not just for creating a map, it's for reflecting what the land record, actually was calling out. One of the things that those of you that ever run into me and hear me talk and make presentations around the country, one of the things that I continually impress on people is that once you move into the parcel fabric, you suddenly change the way you think about what you're doing and your land records. because you're no longer just a cartographer. You actually become a curator of digital land information, because you focus as much about, okay, what was the document that created it? What did that document spell out? How did it define this on that one document versus how does it fit together into the map? You're trying to go and pull as much of that information off the document and get it into this model as you are about producing that map. So it's a different mindset as you're moving into this. I don't want to go and sort of discourage anybody. It's a really interesting way to start thinking about it. And again, I start putting on these different hats, whether I'm GIS or surveying or whatever. But yeah, this model that you're seeing right here is actually a reflective model of a more intensive data model, just rather than just tax lots going in and producing your tax lot map, which is a requirement. By the way, one of the things you noticed, and I've noticed before anybody else makes it, when I move this line, all right, because of topology, when I move that line and it moved that point, it moved every other line that was associated with that point, whether it was turned on or not, so that my lots have now been redefined to there, whereas they were before. So just be aware that this is all, I will often in demos do things that I should never, ever do. That's really not what you want to do. I just want to reflect how this works when you're going and putting this in place. All right. So we are coming up. Come on. Modify the feature. There we go. We're coming up on 2 hours. While I could keep talking, I think it might be time for a break. Does anybody have strong feelings against taking a break? No? So why don't we take a break here? How long a break should we take? 15 minutes? 20 minutes? How long does anybody need?
15
I like 20.
Like, okay.
20 is all right.
Let's do a 20-minute break. So we will come back here at 1/4 the hour. Okay, it'll be 1/4 for me. It'll be 1/4 9, 10 for you. 10 for you. All right. So I ask of one thing before we go on the break. Okay. By the way, I'm going to pause this recording. I'm going to turn off my webcam. Please turn off your webcam and your mics when you do this. Think of questions. We've introduced a lot. We barely scratched the surface on the parcel fabric. Think about questions, and we'll open this up after the break with questions about what we've shown so far and implications for it. All right. Thank you. Let's go ahead and pause the recording, and I'll see you back here in 20 minutes. All right. So hopefully everybody had a nice break there. All right. So I had asked before we went on break to have people think of questions about what we've gone over so far. Because as we're going through this, you're going to find we continually build upon what we had previously done before. So I want to make sure there is complete understanding of what we've got so far. So what questions do we have?
I had a question.
Yes.
So I just wanted to make it clear in my mind. So, and this is maybe more for Dean as well. Dean, you'd said that we currently in the Lincoln or in the ORMAP model, we don't have a parcel type for subdivisions and parcel types for lots, but we could if we wanted to add that, right? So when Frank went and drew a subdivision line or created a record, drew a subdivision line, that line was part of the record. If I draw a subdivision line, even if I have a record started, it won't be part of the record because we don't have that set up. Is that correct?
Okay, so a couple things there. So I'll describe a very quick business process. So right now in your data set, you have in your reference lines, I believe, you have subdivision lines and lot lines, correct?
Right.
And they are cartographic reference to of how you constructed the tax lots. So the record is the outline of or it's a polygon that contains all of the tax lots or all of the things that you used to create that record, to create that transaction, if you will. So a good way to look at it is, so let's say I'm going to start. So I would, if I was going to do this using the current model, just making it up as I go, it not being a cartographer or a surveyor or anything, I would COGO in the outer boundary. And I would COGO the outer boundary to reflect all the line breaks that are reflected in all of them. So if the subdivision line was 1,000 feet and it was broken into lots that were each 80 feet wide, I would put that whole outer outline in there. Okay. So once that outline is done, in my mind, I whether you create a record at that time or not, that's up to you. But I would select all those lines. Again, this depends on how you approach it. Do you want that outline to fit topologically into all your others? How do you want to do that? But let's just keep going. So then I would fill in all my lots, checking my closure and everything else, or I would fill in my right of ways, and then I would do lots, all of it. So I got my line work done. And then I would arrange it, create polygons and all that good stuff. So it's all set to go. I would assume right now in ArcMap, then once it's all there, you would select those lines that were subdivision lines, and you would transfer those to your reference lines, and using your cartographic rules of when to display a subdivision or a line or not, you would do that. There would be no polygons. You would also do the same thing for your lot lines. If those lot lines, if, for example, you had a lot line of judgment as part of the transaction process that you're looking at, so they were slightly different, again, you would move those lot lines that were no longer consistent with your existing tax lines over into your other, so you know what the original lot lines were. So again, all of your data, the way I looked at it was that subdivision lines and reference lines were nothing more than a reference, cartographic reference to how you created those tax lots. So, okay, so the record is a polygon outline that contains the entire transaction. So for example, if I had done a deed and I'd merged it, my record outline would not just contain my original merge, but if I merged, it wouldn't just contain the deed outline, it would also contain the tax lot that I merged in, or the tax lot they split out of it. So that's a reference to where that transaction took place and all the things associated with that transaction, which for me is one of the coolest things about the whole show. But again, in this approach, that's what you have. Now, if you were going to make a parcel type for subdivisions, the plat boundary, and a parcel type for the lots, that's an entirely different business process. And how then you cartographically reference those new parcel types in your new mapping environment. Those are conversations I could go on for probably for the rest of the day. Those are design considerations that are huge, and it's up to you. And we sidestepped them all because we figured the leap of getting the record in and the lots in, this would give counties the most flexibility in how they wanted to do it. So at this particular time, how you've got that is that there is no relationship between the record, the final, well, you could say the final record boundary and the subdivision lines that you want to have cartographically, other than they're very similar. And as we used to talk, that tax lot lines and lot lines always overlap except when they don't. Same sort of deal.
Okay, thanks.
Does that help?
Yeah.
And
Frank,
also
I'm sure you
just-
have a lot of comments on that because I opened a lot of doors.
You know, that's a discussion I have with almost every client about overall their data design, how they're going to deal with it, what they're really looking to go and do. And you're right. So just sort of to build on, again, this is the folder for all the information that we had links to before. And inside of this is this T7-4V2-203, which I think has actually been supplemented, isn't it? You've got new ones out there. Inside of there is a fabric folder, and that's actually what I'm using so that the sample fabric that Dean has provided as part of the ORMAP, it actually has this data model fully built out, which has tax lots, condos, lots, and subdivisions. And you can experiment with that and see if that's going to suit your overall organization needs, and whether you want to explore that or whether you want to move into some other type of overall data design. It is really personal what you're doing on there. I can go and give explanations for why you might want to do it, but not necessarily make that decision for you. That's something that individually each organization has to go and decide. What are you going to go and manage, and why are you doing that? And anybody that knows me knows my favorite expression is the juice worth the squeeze? What are you going to get out of it for you to go and do that? What's your overall needs? So, but the good conversation. Thank you. Thank you. All right. What other questions do we have? Anybody? No. All right. I'm going to ask you, by the way, when you ask a conversation, if you have a web map, please turn your web map on, only because that way I can see you. And more importantly, on the recording, we can see who's actually asking that question. So, Dean, you didn't have to turn that off. That's fine. All right. So let's look back and see how far we've gone so far. So we talked about the parcel fabric, and this is, again, the data model for the parcel fabric, in which you've got basically a controller object, which is going to track while it's active those features that are part of it and associate them with the records using the global ID of the record. And you've got connection lines, polygons, points, and here's your topology rules, or your rules over here that goes and reports it. As we saw, you can actually go in there and identify what type of, what version of parcel fabric. And if in fact, just be aware that by now you're all almost always going to be in version 5 or above, but earlier than that, there actually was a rule. And Dean and I were talking about this yesterday. There previously was a topology rule that said that every feature inside your data model had to have a record associated with it. That's been changed from topology over to a validation attribute rule, but it's still in there. Everything is supposed to be associated with a record inside the parcel fabric. Topology rules, here's where we talked about, went through the individual topology rules, the 6 topology rules for every single parcel type that's in the parcel fabric. And we went through them already. Deployment options. There's actually 2 different deployment options. The first one, and the easiest one to go and sort of implement, is the file geodatabase. But it's only one editor at a time. And if you do it with the file geodatabase, you then have to go and export your data out so it can be published using some sort of ETL. But by far, if you're just testing, do it to file to your database. Go and check and see if it's going to work for you. The other one is an enterprise deployment in which you actually set up your portal, and it requires that you have a special user type assigned to that enterprise so that the REST services become fully implemented. Compatibilities, this isn't quite as important anymore, but you will know that if you are doing an enterprise implementation, that you must match the enterprise implementation with the actual version of ArcGIS Pro. And the Parcel Fabric version, some of these earlier ones were a little, shall we say, hinky. They were a little difficult to use sometimes. So the reason why this has to occur is that much of, on an enterprise level, you're going and using REST services, and those REST services have a lot of the business rules associated inside the server. And the ArcGIS Pro desktop version would often make calls that were not available in earlier releases of the server, and you would run into problems. You would go to do a certain function, and in this case, it might have been if you were using versions 2 or 3 of the Parcel Fabric and the actual server was down at 10.7.1 or 10.8.1, and you tried to do a clip, it would give you an error saying you can't do a clip because it didn't have all the code available on that server side. That's sort of straightened itself out a little bit, and you'll actually see that down here, that at the enterprise level 10.9.1 and 11.0 and 11.1, you can use Parcel Fabric version 5 on there, and you're able to use 2.9, 3.0, and 3.1 against that. So the fabric has now gotten mature enough that they're extending this across multiple enterprise releases.
So you're telling me that I don't actually have to necessarily bump my enterprise up to 11 since I'm on 10.9.1 if we use ArcGIS Pro 3.0, at least until they get to 3.1 or do it.
It's being recorded. Please don't share this with anybody from Esri. All right. Okay. Yeah, do not go to 11 yet. Do not. There's issues with it. And it's not just related to Parcel Fabric, but it's I actually, interestingly, I'm looking at my email at the same time, and I've had several emails notices from clients, and they're noting that with 11, there's some slowdowns occurring with Pro 3.x. And it's not just the Parcel Fabric, it's services and things of that sort. So please stay. 10.9.1 is really stable, really good. And there's not a whole lot that you're getting yet and moving over to 11. So stay at 2.9.1, please. Okay.
Noted. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay. Determining Parcel Fabric, again, you can right click on the Parcel Fabric object and open up the fabric, and it will tell you what actual version of the Parcel Fabric it is. And you can determine what it is. Like I said, the upgrade data set, there's a geoprocessing tool called upgrade data set that's used to do this. Just be aware it only likes to go up one version at a time. It doesn't like to skip versions because each of these newer versions had some new attributes in there, some new feature classes, and 5 has got some additional attributes in there. So it doesn't like skipping, and it will give you error messages. You have to go up one at a time if you're upgrading beyond there. If you're just starting out, you don't have to worry about that. So the Parcel Fabric feature classes, these are the ones that are in the Parcel Fabric, and they are associated with the Parcel Fabric. And you've got the Parcel Fabric controller object, you've got connection lines, you've got points, you've got record polygons, topology, and some feature. some relationship classes that it has, in this case, by default, it has at least the connections on here. This is the minimum. And notice you don't have anything in the fabric in this. You've got no additional parcel types. This is just the structure itself and the minimum feature classes inside of there. Adding a parcel fabric type, or excuse me, a parcel type. If you go to the parcel fabric object, right click, go to manage and say add a parcel type. It will go and allow you to add that. And here is this option that says whether or not it's an administrative boundary. Administrative boundaries are a concept in which you can begin to introduce something that's not a traditional land record, a jurisdictional boundary. And I think this is, again, please don't share this recording with Esri. This was a response by Esri to the constant requests they were getting from organizations, from their customers saying, we would like to begin including things like our municipal boundaries or our zoning or our annexation areas, things that are non-traditional land records inside of the parcel fabric. And the problem with that is because there is topology associated with the parcel fabric, every time you go and do an edit in certain areas, it will mark those features that are connected or in any way associated with that as dirty. So that if you had a large jurisdictional or administrative boundary, and it was touching any of those features that you had created or edited. So for example, you did a split on a parcel, which was on the boundary of a municipal boundary. It would then mark the entire municipal boundary as dirty, which meant the next time you went and did validate topology, it had to check everything inside of there. So Esri's solution is to basically say, if you mark something as an administrative boundary, it still has topology rules against the lines and on there, but it does not participate in the topology rule for the polygon, which is an interesting solution. Using it to justify that, yeah, you don't have to go and do that. My suggestion is don't put it in the parcel fabric. A majority of the adjustment tools are available with ArcGIS Pro. They're not part of the parcel fabric. The parcel fabric really doesn't do much with it. The parcel fabric requires that that polygon now has lines defining it, which may or may not be the way it's defined. And you have to maintain those lines constantly on there. So the benefit is it gives you history. You can track according to annexations and such. But is the juice worth the squeeze? I don't know. It depends on how you're really looking at these administrative boundaries. And it's part of the discussion I always have as soon as somebody says, well, we want to put zoning or we want to put municipal boundaries inside the parcel fabric. Just be aware that there's more work associated with it, but there might be enough value, and you've got to have that discussion. So again, the administrative boundary, the only thing that it does is just allows you to go and analyze and say, does this? So let me go and show you here. I have a where are they? Final data. I have here parcel fabric. And this parcel fabric has an annexation feature type on it. And this annexation feature type is set up as an administrative boundary. And the only difference between normal boundary and administrative boundary is that if I look at the rules for this, All right, feature classes. Oh, sorry, I can't show you this one. I'll have to show you a different one. One of the earlier deliveries. This possibly. Come on. As I'm working, I wind up turning off the topology on some of these. Sorry. What? Oh. Yeah, these are 3.0. Sorry. That was my fault. Sorry for that distraction. Yeah, so just be aware that the only difference is with the administrative boundaries, the polygon does not have the topology ruled against it. That's the way they've fixed that. Upgrade the data set. Again, be careful if you're on an enterprise deployment or using an older desktop. If you're on an enterprise deployment, you actually have to stop the service and upgrade it because there's new feature classes built into that. Adding a parcel fabric to the table of contents, often what will happen is that people will go and go in here and let's see, this is it here. So I'll just take, again, this is my feature class here. I'll just take this feature data set and move it in there. It doesn't work that way. With the parcel fabric, because there are specific definition queries and different groupings that have to occur inside of here, inside of your table of contents, in order to go and add a parcel fabric to a table of contents in ArcGIS Pro, you take the object and add that to your current map or add that to your new map when you bring it in. You can't load them as if they were normal components on here. And it's because they group them together according to parcel type, and they group them together and they set definition queries against each of these feature classes. So for example, these lines, they have a definition query against it that says the current lines are marked as having the retired by record is null, meaning there is no retired on here, but the historic lines, that the retired by record is not null. It comes from the same feature class, the same tax lot lines, but the line feature class itself has both current and retired lines stored in it. Same way with the polygons. The retired by record is null, and historic tax polygons, retired by record is not null. So just be aware there is a definition query set against these feature classes when you're bringing them into ArcGIS Pro for editing in your table of contents. What does that mean besides just interacting and working with them? That means that if you're distributing this to someone else, be aware you cannot just copy that feature class and send it to them. It's a standard feature class, but it includes historic and non-historic features inside that feature class. You want to do a selection so they only get the current, or they only get what they're specifically looking for on there. All right. Okay. So when you load it into your table of contents, it goes and sets group layers, it sets definition queries, and sets some standard symbology on here. It also, by the way, sets standard labeling components on here. So you want to remember that when you're loading a parcel fabric into ArcGIS Pro, into the table of contents, you want to take and right click and work against the object, not against all the standard feature classes. All right. We talked a little bit about records, and we had a question earlier about, well, is there a way to automatically populate back and forth on this? And I figured I would take a little break here and show you that, in fact, there is a way to go and do that. Let's go in here to, this is a parcel fabric for Las Cruces, New Mexico. And in Las Cruces, what they've got is they've got there you go, Robin. They are using a parcel fabric to go and not just keep records of historic land records, but they're also tracking submissions of subdivisions and such. Now, this is the city. This is not the appraisal district. This is the actual land development component on here that's using the parcel fabric for that. And so that if I look at this, and by the way, this is, I don't know if I'll actually be able to go and show you this. We'll see. This is actually 3. This is the records feature class. And so it's doing things like giving a name and a plat number and a reception number, an instrument number, book and page, document link and job number, recording date. All this attribution on the records are stored on here, and they keep it on there, and so that they're also determining whether or not it's a proposed subdivision or a current subdivision or whatever. And as part of that, there's also some attribute rules. We haven't talked about attribute rules, and we will before you're done with me. And they won't be showing up here. Right, I will switch over to 3 to go and show you this. Let me go in and I'll have it loading up on another machine here right now. So there is a way to go and do this. So you can take that rules feature class and have it become as rich as you want it to be. Let me go in and load this up here on my other machine. Okay, you can have it become as rich as you want it to be. On here, you can take the record. There really is no required attribute field inside the records feature class other than object ID or excuse me, global ID. But the others are sort of, you can set them up and do whatever you want with them, including things such as setting up domain values and HTML links, those sorts of things on here. While this is loading up, let me go in and do this. I'll switch over to it. So let me go and share to this one. Can you see my other window now? I think you can, right? So inside of here, we have the parcel fabric has attribute rules associated with it. These attribute rules are set up to do things such as anytime I make a change inside of the record, it's automatically going to go through and push these changes down to every feature that's associated with it. And inside of here, we have proposed subdivisions, proposed land bases. Those land bases are basically lots, proposed tax parcels, and proposed easements. You also have current land base, tax parcel subdivisions, and easements. But inside of here, for example, we have this attribute rule, which goes and defines, let's see if we put this on Notepad and make it a little bit easier. Easier to read. So this attribute rule is going to go and take and update everything that's related to it. And it's going to use this global ID. So it's going to be setting up a relationship class over to it. And then it's going to go and update all of these attribute fields every time something gets modified on here. So answer the question, yes, it is possible to go and set it up so that anytime a record gets changed, it automatically populates down to everything else that's associated with it and built into there. It is one of the better uses of records, one of the most comprehensive uses of records that we found and that we've implemented. It is actually a very nice way to go and do this. So it is, again, just a really good way to go and look at and think about how you design the records and where you're going to store information and what you're actually going to store. Any questions on that? Tell me if you want me to go and actually demo any of that in the future. I'll do that. All right. All right. So a record is, again, it's the organizing feature inside the parcel fabric. And records, just be aware that the global ID here is hidden by default. You want to go and change it and make sure that you can at least see it, at least if you're interested in it. You don't have to. But if you really get involved in it, that is the key to all of it. And if you'll notice on here, it's actually indexed. So it does that. So the heads up display. This is the little widget that appears in the upper left corner. This is in ArcGIS Pro 2.9. Here it is. You'll see a gear next to it. In 3.0, you'll see you've got what's called a hamburger there. By the way, if you've noticed, when I went up to the actual gear or the settings on here, I would fumble back and forth because I'm used to using this set instead of this set. So I have to go back and figure out, well, where is that function in here? Because they've changed some of these so my muscle memory is not there yet for going back to 2.9. But this is what the heads up display and setting the active record looks like in 2.9 and 3.0. All right, managing records. Let me go in and say this right now. There is, again, I'm going to pull up Panda Consulting on the website and just show you we actually have a YouTube channel. On the YouTube channel, we have, I think, 75 or so different videos on everything that regarding ArcGIS Pro and ArcGIS Parcel Fabric. And on this one here is the local government information model and its use in the fabric. And I think I also had one about records on here somewhere. These average about an hour. Here we go. This lesson number 2, records. It talks about records and how you actually can begin to use them. If you're in the parcel fabric, you'll find that because of the configuration, that The fabric includes faster ways of doing things, like selecting everything that's associated with the record. You do it up in the heads-up display, you just pull that down. Same way with finding parcels. If you know that everything in your parcel fabric is associated with a record, you can do a search on records. And if you've set up your records correctly, this search is at least 2 to 3 times faster than all the other searches that are inside of ArcGIS Pro, because it's indexed more. It finds ways to go and do it. So managing records is much nicer inside the parcel fabric, to the point where if I go in here and say manage records and I pull up this pane, I can do everything from have it show me the latest records to show me all the records in my map extent, to just selected records that I might have, records from my selected parcels. So if I have a feature, I can select it up here. Records created in the last 7 days. Here's all the records that I've created in the last 7 days. In the last 30 days, obviously I haven't worked on this much, or I can set it up against a query and actually define that query on here. Working with records, once you have records established, it is much more efficient to go and find a record. So by the way, let me just show you what the records actually look like. So if I turn on my records here and get rid of these topology layers, show my records here, I actually can see here's what a record looks like. It is just a polygon on here. And if I open up the attribute table here, it's a polygon feature class. And that feature class just goes and has what all of these different records are inside of here. And you can tell it additional attribution and actually design this so it's something that's very meaningful to you as an organization. However, efficiently working within the parcel fabric, you usually have your records turned off. You don't need to see them. Just know that they are organizing in the background. So if I, in fact, were to go in here and select a record, select a feature here, all right, I can find the records. There's that record, and I can set that as my current or active record here. I can also go here and tell it to go and change the name of this. Yeah, these are just attributes associated with it on here. That's all they are, so that it's just learning to go and interact with a record. And the records are very, very efficient in what you're doing. Any questions on this? I'll just keep talking. So, all right. Creating a record that sets the initial attribution on here. It sets the active record. Again, when you create a record, it sort of creates an empty polygon, and it doesn't really populate the boundary of it until you actually do a build. When you do a build, it actually goes and resets the boundary of the polygon to correspond to all the features that are connected to it. One of the things you want to try to avoid on here is having records that relate. So having one record that relates to multiple objects in here. So for example, one of the early things that one of the mistakes that people often make is that when they first migrate their data in, they don't worry about records because they don't understand the implications of them. And they'll either throw everything into a single record, which, because it redefines the boundary every time you do a build on it, that single record might have 3,000 records, 3,000 parcels in it, and all the lines associated with it. For an efficient component on here, you want to have a record for each of the documents, each of those transactions. But if you have a record which goes and has multiple polygons on here, just be aware that if you work on one of those polygons, that record has to update for everything on here. So it's not very efficient to have that. In 3.1, by the way, it might be 3.0. In 3, there actually is a setting inside the records where it goes and warns you if you don't change the record and you move into a different geographic area, because it's trying to go and warn you this is not very efficient for you to have one record associated with multiple geographic areas. The question is often, well, what's the downside to that? If in fact, if you're familiar with this concept of spatial indexing, inside of Esri's products, in order to make it display and select and query very efficiently, they actually go and internally go and look at features that you have and in your feature class, all right, and analyze them and attempt to identify where the most efficient components are. And it actually creates a grid internally that you're never aware of. And this is called a spatial index. And it's defined, this is A1, this is A2, A3, et cetera, so that when you go in here and you go and change your display extent to here, the first thing it does is it goes and it says, analyzes your data and analyzes all the feature classes inside your data and says, what are the spatial grids that I have to go and draw? And it doesn't bother drawing any of those that are outside the display area. It only draws the ones and analyzes the ones inside your display area. It uses that to do a faster draw, a faster select, just to generally to go and build this. And this is one reason why when you're doing certain analysis, if you've got a feature which extends outside your display area, it's actually extending outside your specific spatial index, and it can't use that. So it disregards that when it goes and does the analysis on here. It's looking at the spatial indexing. Spatial indexing works great until you wind up with something in which you have tiny little things here and a really big thing over here, because it's challenged to try to develop an optimal size for your indexes, because these indexes are flexible. As you create new things, it's constantly recalculating what the most optimal grid size is and where to place that optimal grid. It's all going on in the background. Just be aware that this is something that will impact it. So it impacts things such as a record, which has here and here all in the same record. It's got to rebuild that spatial index, and suddenly you have a record that covers this entire area. And then you've got other records which just cover this area here. It has issues rebuilding and indexing that. Same thing with annexation and administrative boundaries. You wind up with that same issue. The spatial index cannot be very well calculated. So it decreases the efficiency of your spatial index. This is a huge tangent. I'm sorry to go and do that, but just so you understand some of my recommendations why we're doing that. Again, spatial index is a lot of the issues associated with having one record for everything or for having administrative boundaries. Okay. Creating record, again, you can design the record as far as whatever attribution you want. If you want to have an attribute field, which is nothing more than a URL over to a scanned repository, whether it be folders or content management system or something else, you can do that. This is a simple feature class that just happens to be watched by the parcel fabric object. Okay, modifying existing records. Again, I just showed you how it's actually, these are just simple attributes on here. You can go and manage them and modify them and find them in here. Identifying the records or the features in the record. You can do that by just going and saying, select the features in my current record. It's a really efficient way of selecting parcels that you're just interacting with. Adding features to an active record. Again, you select them and then you set your active record and say, go ahead and assign these to that active record as you're going. Showing active. You get the sense that I can keep talking, and if I
So
get
does
no response,
Are
go
the
ahead.
active records shareable outside Arc Pro? Like if an assessor wants to find a record, can they navigate? Can you share it somehow?
Yeah, the active record is nothing but, here it is. It's nothing but a simple feature class. That's all it is. And that's a really important point, and I forgot to tell you that these feature classes that are in the parcel fabric are just simple feature classes. That's all they are. You can access them from ArcGIS Pro. You can access them from ArcGIS Online. If you want to share them, you can go and share it all over. The only difference is that this parcel fabric object is set to watch them if it's active. That's all it is. So you can share these records out with anybody. Yeah, no problem whatsoever. It's a simple feature class. Okay. Good question. Thank you. So showing active. So this is an interesting, I'm going to turn my records off again. So this is an interesting component on here. One of the efficiencies that Esri has included in here is that oftentimes I don't want to see everything else around this while I'm working on it. I want to be able to focus on just what I'm doing. And on the parcels tab, there's a section over here called records. And if I have an active record here, I can say, turn everything off except my current, everything that's associated with my current records on here. So now it will turn everything off except what's associated with this record. And if I change this record, it goes and we'll change that. So it allows me to just work on my current record without me being disrupted by everything else, without me being distracted by everything else in here. It also goes and uses the table of contents. So if I have lots associated with it or condos or anything else, I can turn them on and off here. And it will allow me to control what actually gets displayed here. And what it's actually doing is it's actually, and behind the scenes, let's see if it's still got it here. Yep. It actually is setting a query, a definition query, and says, the created by record is this global ID, and the retired by record is null. So that's what it's actually doing when you do this show only active records. If I go to my definition query for my lots, there it is. There's the global ID for my active record. Okay, when I undo it, it's actually removing all those definition queries, rewriting them so that it's actually now making it available to me on here. So again, this is some efficiency built in here. It has just literally turned everything else off, or this will allow it to go and display that with a different transparency on here. between these two. So I can display on and off as I'm doing that. And that will go in and display. From an efficiency standpoint, this is a good idea. It's an interesting idea. Don't really use it much. We could use it for cartography if we wanted to, but that's about it. This show only active is one that gets used most often as we're going and building things on here. No questions.
I think that was really helpful to sort of see how it was working in the back end.
Yeah.
I also had to know too, and I've used it a lot for when we've tried been creating seeds or something like that, wondering why it's not creating seeds and finding, like turning on show active and seeing, oh, there wasn't a tax lot line inside there and need to move it to that record. That sometimes has been really helpful to sort of display when there's like a gap or something that you need to basically like assign a line to a record to be able to make that complete seed.
And
So
thank you. And that it's sort of, I demonstrated that earlier because I actually created some lines that were not associated with the record and went to create seeds and stuff, and it wasn't building. And it's like, well, why wasn't it building these things? Because they weren't associated with the record. They have to be part of the record for the build and the create seeds to actually work correctly. And again, it just allows you to focus this on what you're really doing here. It is a really nice efficiency tool that's built in, and you'll learn if you start working with the parcel fabric more, you'll learn to actually use that. Thank you, Isla. Good. Thank you for making that that point. Yeah, show active record. Build active, build current, extent. I, up to this point, have been clicking on here, which is build active, but so when I click on build active, it actually goes and looks to the heads up display, looks at what my active record is, does a quick query against all the feature classes associated with it, and finds all the feature classes associated with that record. But there's also a more global component called build extent. And it looks at what that does is first goes and looks at all the records that are inside my extent, and then does a selection or query against all the feature classes to find what's in the extent. Let me go and zoom out a little bit here and show you how I might use build extent. In this case, that's not my active record, but I can see from having a seed there, that's not built, and it should be built. So I can go ahead and build this extent, and it will go through and build everything that's in my extent. And when it builds everything, it goes again to those topology rules and says, okay, do you have polygons that are covered by lines? If not, let's take our polygon seed and expand it so it fits that line. Do you have lines that have points on the end of them? If not, build the points. Do you have lines that cause dangles? If it has any of those topology errors associated with the lines that are failing, it marks them as errors on here. So build extent goes and looks at all the records in your current extent and runs through and determines, are they matching the rules that are in place right now? And that's important because you want to use that to clean up a lot of your topology. All those things that are lacking, it will go and build those for you. All right, that's also another really quick tip. Again, interesting. Dean and I had this discussion because he doesn't use build extent very often, or build even total parcel. It's just for one or two records on here. And when you're actually building in the parcel fabric and actually maintaining everything, you use build extent a lot because it's just a general cleanup. It's kind of like the old clean and build in ArcInfo. And I know I'm dating myself there, but it's the same thing. Just build it. We don't care. I want to find anything that's missing. Go ahead, Dean.
And that's what scares me when you say like the old clean and build. You know, we may do that as we get into more production and have more experience. But at this particular time, we're just being pretty conservative because
Yep.
we don't understand some of the implications of doing those things. So like I say, I will probably
And the
be
difference-
agreeing within 6 months, but right
Yeah.
now, being conservative.
The difference is that clean and build was destructive because it would run through validate topology and it would split and it would go and crack, it would crack and cluster and all that for the topology. So it would move things around on a microscopic level, but it would
And-
move things around.
And it took me 5 years of arguing with the Esri folks that clean really did have a fuzzy creep. And I was told, no, that could never happen. So
Oh,
yes,
yes.
I want to believe you, but we'll have to try that and make sure. And we will, because we lost a lot of, talk about dating. Now, going back to the 90s, when we were initially doing this at Polk County.
Yeah.
So just being careful.
So just to reinforce that, because this build does not run through validate topology. It does not. It runs through the rules, and it's an additive component so that if you've got something missing, it adds it. If there's something that's there that shouldn't be there, it does not delete it. It does not run through topology to look for that. It just
Sounds great.
let's
We'll test.
let's
Now,
let's
I'm sure that's going to be the process. It's just, we
Yeah.
need, and I think this is important for the class. Again, this is very, very important for everyone that as you proceed through all of this with new technology, just make sure it works for you. And if you don't care, you don't care, and we're good. Unfortunately, my cartographers have been very, very particular about certain things, mostly because of that historic clean issue from long ago. They're just untrusting, and I will just have to demonstrate before we implement it. And it's probably got nothing to do with any other county but Polk.
Yeah. So just sort of to work through again, Socratic method. Let's really talk about this. So I have here, I just created a new record. I put in a bunch of lines. Let's go in and see if they close. They do close. So I have a seed here. The build, it will go and evaluate those rules. And if I'm missing something, it will add it. But this should be deleted. If it were to go through and try to fix all the rules, it's an additive run through on here. So let's go and see if I build this. Oh, it built it. It added points. It added and modified the polygon, but it did not delete this line, which was not, well, it's in validation of the rules. It has dangles. It shouldn't be there. It only is an additive topology component on there. So yeah, just be aware that's the way it works. It will add things, but it will not delete things as you're going through and doing a build. Okay. All right. So again, build active goes and evaluates all the features that are marked with the global ID of the current active record, or build current extent goes and builds it for the entire extent on here. Often because the parcel fabrics themselves have this limit of 1,000 parcels for the build when you go and do it, just be aware it will tell you that, oh, you've got more than 1,000 parcels here. I can't do it with this tool. And it will tell you you're going to have to run the geoprocessing tool, which will process everything at the same time. Just be aware. You can set this up for a higher limit. I've never done that. I've always said if you're going to do that much, run it through the big GP tool instead. All right. So we've kind of talked about how things work. we didn't talk about yet really. I've been drawing things just in the middle here. How do you get things to align up? How do you clip? How do you do all of that stuff on here? And so we're going to start looking at the tools and how we actually go and do this, how we align things up, those sorts of things. Before we move on to this, let me ask you, what comments or questions do we have before we move into the next segment? So everybody's got plenty of stuff for the homework, right?
Frank, this is Robin.
Go ahead, Robin.
It kind of goes back to your last demonstration where you had that dangle after you built. And you may be going to cover it in this tool thing, but what would be the best method to eliminate that dangle? Use the parcel fabric tool or use the arc tools?
And I want to make sure that when we're talking through this.
Frank, could you
Yes.
repeat the question? It was really quiet for me.
Okay, yeah, it was quiet on my end too. I actually turned my volume
Okay, sorry
up
about
here.
that. Let's try it again.
Okay.
So when you want to get rid of this dangle after you have built, what's going to be the best method? Use Arc Pro tool or use parcel fabric tool? Because obviously you got to get rid of a line and you got to get rid of a point.
Okay, so first of all, I'm glad I like the way you expressed that. Let's start with this. There is no ArcGIS Pro tool to do this. Pro tools, there's only a few pro tools in here, and they work with this combination of things. For the most part, when you are working, you're going to be using ArcGIS Pro tools. Remember, the parcel fabric, all it's doing is watching in the background as you're interacting with this stuff, and it can go through and query to see if it closes a polygon and see if it builds it, but it's just sort of checking those rules. That's all it does. The tools don't do anything else. The parcel fabric just sort of is a way to validate that you've met those topology rules. It doesn't clean them up, doesn't do anything. When I used to talk about them, because I've actually been talking about the parcel fabric since the first holistic testing. And we've now gone and helped almost 50 organizations transition into it. But when I first started talking about this, I used to say that the parcel fabric, you can kind of think of this as super topology. Oh, okay, it's tracking what I'm doing, and it will validate the rules and fix the things that are missing on here. But what it doesn't do, it doesn't actually delete anything that's in here. It's only for adding things, not for deleting things. So in order to fix this, you would again use the topology rules and the error inspector in here. And I can go in here and put it here and say validate my current extent. All right. And there I have must not have dangles. And if I look at a preview, it's that line right there. All right. That's that line. And I can fix that by deleting it, or I can just select it. Select this line. Come on. Select that line, and I can go and delete it. Where is it here? I can delete that. Line must be covered by the boundary. Again, I can go and do it. I can remove this segment on here, and it will remove that line. Notice the points. There is no topology rule that says the point has to be on the line. It just says the line has to have points on it. So there is nothing to go and fix the point. You literally have to go and select that point and then delete it. That's it. All right. So cleaning up, it really doesn't help with the parcel fabric to go and do that. However, if I were to mistakenly go and delete those 2 points on here, the parcel fabric will correctly validate it. If I go in here and validate this, it says, oh, you've got some lines, that you've got a polygon area that doesn't have lines on it. If I tell it to create a line now, those lines are going to be in conflict with the rule that says everything has to have a record tag to it. So I don't want to add things through my error inspector. I want to instead just go and say just build my current record. Let it build those lines back, and those lines will now be correctly attributed with the record global ID. So when I go in here and say, okay, now I have no errors. So it's complicated, I know, sorry. So to check the errors, you use the error inspector. To delete things, you can identify them and delete them yourselves. But to add things, you should use the parcel fabric build to add them. And you would probably build not the active record, but the build extent on there. Did that help at all?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, sorry. I wish it were easier, but we've not been able to convince them to fix the topology error fixes where it would say, oh, what's the active record on here? And the reason being, you can still fix topology without having active records. And it's tough for it to say, oh, that's actually, that line goes with this polygon on here. So it's never a good way to go in and add things using the topology error inspector and the fixes on there. All right. Go ahead,
Frank.
Daniel. Yes.
Yeah, I had a question about when we're migrating all of our current data into this new system, how would we go about, is there some sort of way to automate the process of assigning all of our current data to records, or yeah?
Dean?
Yeah. So we did a lot of different tests initially. For example, did this, and I know that John up in Clackamas did this as well. One alternative is that if you've got a survey index, you could use your survey index polygons and then make the decision that your survey index polygons are going to select tax lots. Your tax lots then will be attributed and you'll generate records from those. But you start to get into issues in that all those surveys overlap each other, and what decisions are you going to make regarding them? I had some frustrating things and said, screw it, Frank, I don't care about their validation. I'm not going to mess with it. And another piece, when you come across from the conversion, your shared lines, it's going to decide which line it goes with, the record goes with, or the line goes with which record. So I ended up as a test, and that is in the conversion example that is in the data set, is to, I made my records be the maps. My rationale was maps are the official assessor record, and tax lot or map number is associated with every tax lot. It's well within it, and it also does some nice things for you, that if you see that the record is the map number, you know that it came from the conversion. So you've got a nice way to organize your data of pre and post pro. Ran into some issues with how in the conversion process you can do that. And as of yesterday, with, some comments from Frank and the like, I think I have a process that will do that so that the lines will know what record they're in. When you're doing the conversion, you run into a number of issues that go way beyond what we're doing in the class. Suffice to say is that when you move things across, you have choices into how you will assign features to a record. And if you don't have any COGO attributes you care about in your line work, you can go down one path. If you have a lot of COGO and historical data that you've been using in ArcMap, you need to go down another path. And again, those are design issues that you would have to look at. And I know, Dan, I'm meeting with you guys in another week or so to talk about just conversion and implementation. And I'd recommend we have that conversation. I have within the conversion examples, 2 sample conversion scripts, and I'm based on what I learned yesterday, I'm building a 3rd. And so you have choices, and it depends on your data, and depends on what you want to do in the future. But John and I were really not, both of us have very, very good in polygon indexes of all past plats. And we really didn't know how to implement that in a way that made sense. And so didn't go down that path. So those are just some design issues that you need to look at. I know that Frank, in our discussions yesterday, you said you assigned every tax lot or parcel to be its own record as a result of a conversion. So lots of choices, lots of design considerations. Like I say, the sample does have in it the ability to create the map number as the record, and it creates a record for every map boundary. Just some things to think about. I hope that wasn't too long, Frank. Sorry.
No. Let me see if I can add just a little bit to it. So converting polygons in is a fairly simple process, because you bring the polygon in, you append it into your structure, and you tell it to create a record, and you tell it to create the record either through an attribute on the field, or you tell it to calculate something for the new record name, and it will build the record, and it will create lines for you. It becomes more complex when you're attempting to bring lines in and specifically associate them with polygons. Because remember, we had that discussion earlier about inside the parcel fabric, you have overlapping lines or you have shared lines. So it has no way for you to tell it what you want to build. So if you have overlapping lines, it becomes confused. If you have shared lines, it becomes confused. Which of these adjoining polygons do I go and make? Which record do I make part of that? So, yeah, polygons are easy. Lines are the more complex. And Dean and I have been working through and trying to figure out a better process, because when you want to capture the COGO attributes that you have, it becomes a challenge, because you don't know the resulting lines that it creates are not always going to match exactly the lines that you've got for your mapping. So and I hate to say this, but it is more of a design, and you wind up challenging yourself. And it's interesting because when we go and when Panda goes and does a migration, and we do, like I said, we've done close to 50 of them now, we always have to have that discussion about how are we going to handle the lines that you have? Do you wish to capture anything out of those lines, or are we free to go and create new ones? And often we'll wind up going through 2 or 3 different prototypes just until we get something that the client both understands and agrees, yeah, that's the way we're going to do it from now on. Once it's in there, then it's easy, because now you've got the tools to figure out how you assign lines to records and those sorts of things. But it's that migration that's always a challenge. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you both.
And that brings up another point. And it reminds me of what I was going to go and say in that earlier, and that let me create a record here where I just call it polygon so we understand what's going on here. So up until this point, we have been building parcels from lines. Well, it turns out that because of the way the parcel fabric works, again, validating those topology rules and creating things that are missing, I actually have a much better way of creating a parcel by just saying, create the polygon and then, hey, build this thing. Boom. It creates the lines, it creates the points, it creates everything for me. So again, that's another workflow that you can go and use and say, okay, well, maybe if I have polygons and I'm not using the lines. Now, from a land record standpoint, it's almost always, the reality is it's not the polygons you're building, it's not the lines you're building, you're actually finding the location of the corners. Again, from a surveying standpoint, you're looking constantly for corners and monuments marking the corners. But yeah, so you can build from lines, you can build from polygons. There's a couple different ways of doing this. And just to show you, if we only have a polygon, we can go and use that polygon to build our parcel, and it will automatically go and create the things that are missing. It will create the points, it will create the lines for me and make them all part of that record. Okay.
Hey, Frank, so quick question. Is a record then incomplete without a seed?
The record is incomplete without a polygon, but remember, a seed is just a really, really tiny polygon in there.
Okay.
So if I go in here and just sort of, let's see if we can demonstrate this. If I delete that polygon and tell it to create a seed, let's go in here. This is actually a very, very tiny polygon is what this is. All right, if I go in here and select just that one polygon, and if I look at the attributes, this has got here, 33 square feet. It's a tiny polygon. So the polygon, and by the way, there's an attribute here on the polygons that says, is this a seed or is this not a seed? And that's how the parcel fabric, when we do a build, it runs through all of those features that are marked with that created by record and says, is this a polygon that's marked as a seed? If it's a seed, expand it out till it matches those boundaries. If it's not a seed, don't touch it. So that's how it knows, by the way, what to go and build out so that it matches the boundaries out there, or what not to build out, what not to touch when it's going through here. So it is correct to say that a record is not complete if it doesn't have a polygon, but that polygon can be marked as either a seed or as a full-blown not a seed. And if you look over here again, this actually says, no, that's not a seed anymore. It's now a real polygon. Okay.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks. Good questions that we're beginning to understand here on here. So the other thing we want to look at is, before we get into the tools, and I'm trying to go through, I don't know whether we want to. Yeah, let's talk about the tools. Let's talk about the Traverse tool. Okay. There's a slight difference in the Traverse tool between 2.9 and 3.0. Mostly the difference has to do with the speed in which we're going. But other than that, let's look at the Traverse tool. The Traverse tool is not a parcel fabric tool. It is a standard ArcGIS Pro tool. It works no differently between Pro and the fabric. There's no difference. It's just creating features. It's creating lines or polygons. And if you have an active record, while the Traverse tool creates these features, the parcel fabric is coding them and setting up that relationship. It's attributing whether or not it's created by. Good. Okay, so let's go in here and let's do this. Let's just select everything inside of here and let's delete that. All right, so then we've deleted everything associated with this one record. So we'll start here now. So let's look at the Traverse tool. The Traverse tool, again, the Traverse tool allows you to go and input using traverses, bearings and distances, or courses, directions and distances, using Esri's terminology. And you can use those directions and distances to build either a chain of lines or a polygon. With the Traverse tool, you can build a polygon or you can build lines themselves for that. All right. Hopefully you were aware of that. You can go and do that. Whichever you build, it will go and determine what layer everything gets stored on. And if you're working in a parcel fabric, it will determine that you're going to build tax polygons when you're putting tax lines in. You can't use subdivision lines to build a tax parcel. It only uses the lines that are of that same parcel type on here. Even, yeah, let's start with that. Okay. So start point. Again, I can interactively select something here. I can right click and tell it absolute X, Y if I want to start it at a specifically known coordinate value on here. I have that option in here, and this is to go and set the initial traverse point on here. I then have the ability to go and define bearings. All right. By the way, we have a video out there that takes 1 hour to dig into the Traverse tool and tell you all the little tips and tricks for inputting values in the Traverse tool. Just to let you know, worth it if you're really going to be working on Traverse. We work 90% of our time at Traverses. So there are multiple ways. Let's start with this. There are multiple ways to input bearings or directions. I can put north 45 degrees east in here just by doing that. And then I hit enter to go and move into the next field on here. Let me go and expand this a little bit. And then I can go and input a distance on here. All right. First big difference between ArcGIS Pro and ORMAP Traverse tool is that with the ORMAP tool, you were creating a sketch and it was never really features until you finished the sketch. In ArcGIS Pro, every line that you create, it actually is inserting that line already. That line exists now. It's not a sketch, it's a line already in here. So we can always go in and do that. If I want to go and do north, I can put due north in there until it's 200 feet. And again, it will do that. By the way, at 3.1, it will now pan and zoom so that the entire traverse is in your window. Doesn't do it at 3, but it does it at 3.1 on here. It's built in there now. So that's how the standard way of going in and putting directions or bearings. However, I can also go and use a formatting so that I could use quadrant references. So if my next one here is 45 degrees, but it's due, or excuse me, it's northeast, I can put a dash and then put a quadrant in there for northeast and enter. It then will go and convert that into there, and I can make it 200 feet again. All right. And again, does anybody need for me to explain the quadrants? Northeast is 1, southeast is 2, southwest is 3, northwest is 4. We good with that? By the way, there is a really good learn more here at the very bottom here, which goes and explains shortcuts and overrides. And we'll explain quadrants, quadrant references, has all sorts of quadrant bearing references here that you can use, calculations on here, a lot of different overrides in here. Again, I filled up the hour with these things on here. I'm going to show you most of them now. So as we go and type things in and hit enter, once it puts that line in, it drops down to the next grid and copies the values above it in case you want to go and continue with those. You'll note, and it's subtle, but you'll note before the 45 here, there's actually a little asterisk. That asterisk means that if I continue with a north 45 degrees east on here, not there, here, it's going to be tangent to the previous line. So I might be able to go and add that, and it will be tangent. And you'll note in here that with that column, it's marked as being tangent to the previous line. So in I think it's in 2.9, it might be in 3.0. When you make adjustments, it keeps these two lines tangent as you're moving through. So it keeps them along the same bearing as we're adjusting these through. But another aside. So I can use bearing references. I can also go and tell it, wow, my mind just went blank. I can tell it to go and do a deflection angle. So I can tell it to do a deflection angle of 90 degrees to the right. That's a positive one. And note, it calculated what 90 degrees to the right is. And I can tell it 50 feet on here. And it goes and do that. I can tell it to go and do 90 degrees to the left and go that same value again. So I could do plus or minus deflection angles. I can also do quadrants references on here. If I have a specific minutes and seconds on here, let's say I have 60 degrees, 0.30 minutes, 15 seconds, southeast, I can input it with that type of input and then tell it what my distance is. All right. Simple stuff, but it helps you when you're going and doing that. I often get a question of why would you use quadrant bearings instead of the north and east and south and west? Mike, did you have a question?
I did. What happened to curves?
Oh, I'm going to tell you about curves.
Oh, goody.
I'm going to tell you about curves. Yeah, you're just a little bit early. A little bit early.
My bad.
Okay, that's okay. Not a problem. As far as the quadrant references, it actually saves you from going and actually looking at the keyboard to figure out where the N and the E and the S and W is. And it keeps your hand on the numeric keypad on your keyboard. Saves you steps. That's all. It's more efficient to go and do it that way. Curves. All right. Let's talk about curves. So with a curve, by default, let's make sure in here. Yeah. By default, we can tell it what type of a curve, and we have to go and input And let me go and do some drawing. I can't, I'm an old teacher. I have to draw things, to illustrate things. So with a curve, there's a couple of components on here. One, where is the line that goes from the point of curvature to the radius point, which is what we're going to subtend the curve from. This is called the radius distance. This is a radial bearing. Okay, this radius point is actually going to define the curve, right? And at the end of the curve, we're going to have another radial line. And this radius distance is the same as the first one. This point here is called the point of curvature. This is called a point of termination. Or if it goes into compound curves and more curves on here, it's that. So this is called the arc length. All right, or the L, that's the arc length, is the distance along the curve. If we take a line and connect up with the point of curvature with the point of termination, this is called the chord. All right, and we have with that the chord distance, which is the distance from here to here, and we have the chord bearing, which is from here. All right, we're building sort of the components of this. The line coming in here, this is called the line coming in, and if in fact that radius point is 90 degrees to the line coming in, this is called a tangent curve, meaning the radius is 90 degrees from the line coming in that goes to the point of curvature. If we extend that out, we wind up with an intersection where if we go and continue this line here and continue this line here, we wind up, not very well drawn, but we wind up with a point of intersection of my tangent lines. This point of intersection is where my beginning line and my ending line intersect on here. And so let's start with this. So the angle that's subtended between the point of curvature and the point of termination, this is often called the central angle or the delta angle. All right. That is the angle that's subtended by that curve, and it's the angle between the lines, the radial lines for the point of curvature and the point of termination. Well, some interesting things start happening here. If this is a tangent here, this is a 90 degrees here, 90 degrees here. And if we go and draw a line from the radius point up to the point of intersection, it sort of splits this curve in half, splits this in half. This winds up being the delta angle divided by 2, and it's the same thing here. That's the delta angle divided by 2. All right, so let's go here, and this winds up being the delta angle here also. It turns out that the geometry that's associated with a curve is really right triangles, is what this thing is. It's interesting because this winds up being a right triangle also. But there's all sorts of components in here, and these are trigonometric functions that define how this are. So these are the components that we need to be able to go and draw a curve. We need to know the radial distance on here. We need to know, that's this radius here. We need to know one other component. We need to know either the central angle or the arc length or the chord length. We need one of those three, and we're going to put one of those three in this arc length grid in here. And then finally, we need to know sort of the orientation of this curve. Is this curve oriented this way, or is it oriented this way? Is it oriented this way? So we need to know the orientation. So we need a bearing. That bearing will be defined here in this direction grid. All right, so we've got radius distance, always required. You can't build a curve without the radius distance. And then you need one of the others. You need this, the delta angle, the chord distance, or the arc length. And they go here. So there's a radius, one of the other three here. And then finally, you need the orientation for that curve. Got it? Okay, so let's start with the orientation of the curve. Let's start with a tangent line or a tangent curve, one that is tangent to our previous lines. We can actually go and use a couple shortcuts. I'm going to show you the most popular one now, which is the asterisk. If I put the asterisk in here, it means that it's tangent to my previous course. It will become tangent to it. And then I hit enter. And for my distance field, for a curve, it is always 0. 0. You don't want anything in that field, that attribute field. The radius, in this case, I'm going to use 200 feet. Now with the radius, I need to know, is the curve curving to the right, meaning the radius is on the right side from my previous line, or is it curving to the left? Is it on the left side? Thank you, Dean. So if it's a positive radius, it's to the right. If it's a negative radius, it's to the left. So in this case, let's just make it a positive radius, meaning it's going to curve to the right. And then I can put one of the other three. So I can use the central angle on here. So I can say 90 degrees, and then I tell it D for delta angle. Now that D can be an uppercase or lowercase, it doesn't matter. If it's angles, if it's degrees, minutes, or seconds, it's 90 point minute, second. So I can tell it with that sort of formatting to go and do that. But in this case, let's just do 90 degrees and hit enter. And when I do that, it goes and inserts a curve. And then that curve gives me the bearing coming out of the curve, and it is the tangent bearing. And this is important. As we say down here in South Florida, it's muy importante es de los todos. This is important. If you are inputting things on a traverse, you want to pay attention to the bearing coming out of the curve to see if it matches what's on your legal description or on your subdivision plat. That's the first way to go and validate and check that it's going to be input correctly as you're moving along. You want to check the tangent bearing coming out. All right. So
Frank, this is Jeff. I find that most of the time it's off by a few seconds. And I put that down to rounding, and I'll change it to the bearing that's actually done by the surveyor, and then continue on.
So great point, Jeff. So on here, I'm going to give you Frank's tips on this. All right. So I often get that question. So why is it that it's off a little bit? And the reality is it depends upon which parameters you input there. Because remember, there's the radius here, there's the arc length here, which is L, and there's the chord distance here, and then there's the delta angle. All right, let's not confuse that. All right. So those are the options of what you have to put in here. So let me go and tell you that on legal descriptions and on subdivision plats, there is everything is rounded. It's either rounded to the closest 100th of a foot, or it's rounded to the closest second. Okay, so in this case, 100th of a foot here, or 100th of a foot here on the core distance, or seconds here. On short curves meaning less than 500 or 800 feet radius. Those are short curves. The curves that are found typically in a subdivision, those curves, the most accurate way to input those values are to input the radius and the central angle. That will get you and eliminate the rounding that occurs on your arc lengths and your curves, because these two are the most precise, meaning they're at the smallest unit when you have shorter radius curves. However, if you have a long curve, all right, long curve, and you look at the geometry on here, again, the radius is never going to change. You're always going to get that radius, but this arc length, if you get a little bit of an adjustment in a second level, it makes a very big adjustment as you go out here. So when you get into longer curves, the more precise way of going and putting it in is using the radius and either the arc length or the core distance on there. But in a subdivision, almost always these two, radius and central angle, or long curves, radius and arc length or core distance. Okay. So it is coming up on noon. I'm going to stop this here. We're going to stop this on here. Thank you, everybody. So we're going to pick this up tomorrow. And again, tomorrow at 8 o'clock. First thing we're going to do is start with homework and that discussion. Then we're going to pick this up again and build on this. So please remember to go and pick up something you're going to talk about, because I will call on everybody. I'm going to make sure everybody goes and participates in this discussion. But it's mostly just, what did we pick up today with this? Because you listened to me for 4 hours. I am sorry about that, but let's see if we can go and figure out and see if we make this a little bit more meaningful. All right. Tomorrow, same Zoom, and I'll see you at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. All right. Thank you.
Thanks, Frank.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Have a great lunch.
Thanks.
Thanks, Frank.